When life pushes two souls into a marriage that should never have existed, an unexpected truth is born. Sometimes love appears exactly where the pain feels unbearable. In this story of resilience, redemption, and forbidden romance, you will discover that the heart knows how to choose the impossible. Get ready to hear one of the most moving stories ever told. The March sun hung over San Miguel del Valle like a burning copper coin, fading the colors of the adobe houses and turning the packed earth into a fine dust that clung to skin and lungs. It was Tuesday, and the midday heat drove the dogs to seek shade beneath abandoned carts, while the older men dozed on their porches, hats covering faces weathered by time. The silence of the village was broken only by the occasional cooing of pigeons and the distant creak of a windmill. In the small Martinez house, built with uneven bricks and a roof of cracked red tiles, the air smelled of sour corn dough and lye soap. Karina knelt on the packed earth floor, scrubbing a cotton shirt against the washboard stone with rhythmic movements that made the muscles in her arms burn. She was 21, with a face that combined the strength of the land with a discreet, almost reluctant beauty. Her light brown hair, tied in a loose bun, escaped in rebellious strands that clung to her sweaty neck. Her eyes were the shade of burnt honey, holding a sharp intelligence she had learned to hide behind short answers and a lowered head. The water in the basin was murky, but she kept scrubbing because clean water was a luxury, and the week had only just begun. Beside her, Celeste mended a pair of Javier's trousers with thread far too thick, and a bent needle, her rough fingers struggling against the worn fabric. Her mother was 43, but seemed to carry 60 on her. Curved back and in the deep lines around her mouth, she wore a faded gray dress that had once been blue and a wooden crucifix at her neck, a gift from the grandmother who had died when Karina was 12. Leon sat at the rough pine table, his head in his hands, fingers tangled in his thin graying hair. In front of him lay a promissory note, yellowed with time and folded so many times it looked ready to fall apart. He stared at the paper, as if it were a death sentence written in black, ink and merciless numbers. Beside it, a clay mug filled with cold coffee that no one dared drink. Javier, 9 years old and with scraped knees from chasing chickens, crouched in the corner playing with a wooden toy car he had carved himself with a dull knife. The boy had dark hair like his father, and a smile that had not yet learned to distrust the world. Every now and then he lifted the toy and made engine sounds with his mouth, oblivious to the tension thickening the air of the house like smoke from green wood. Karina wrung the shirt with force, squeezing every drop of dirty water back into the basin, then stood with a restrained sigh. She hung the piece on the makeshift clothesline that stretched across the tiny yard, where 3 hens scratched among stones and weeds. The smell of dry manure mingled with old tortillas and the metallic odor of well water. She wiped her hands on her worn apron and went back inside, where the heat was even worse, trapped by thick walls that held the mugginess like an oven. "Father, are you going to sit there all day staring at that paper?" Her voice came out firmer than she intended, but Karina no longer had patience for disguises. Leon lifted his head slowly, his eyes red not from crying but from sleepless nights and the weight crushing his chest since the last full moon. He was 52, had worked his whole life repairing harnesses, saddles, and boots, but now his hands trembled too much to stitch leather with the precision he once had. Customers had dwindled, pesos had vanished, and what remained had been swallowed by last year's drought and the promises he had made back when he still believed hard work was enough to feed a family. "Victor is coming today," Leon said, his voice rough like sandpaper on old wood. "Alejandro stopped by Don Ramirez's store last night. He said the boss wants to settle the accounts once and for all." Celeste dropped the mending into her lap and closed her eyes for a moment, her lips moving in a silent prayer she had repeated 100 times with no answer. Karina felt something hard tighten in her chest, not fear exactly, but a cold, calculated anger that had been growing ever since she heard Victor's name in her father's mouth for the first time. "How much is left?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. 380 pesos with the interest. Leon swallowed. "He charges 12% a month." It began. "With 100 pesos borrowed a year and a half ago. I have already paid 230, but the interest devours everything." Karina knew enough math to understand that this debt would never close. Victor was a loan shark, and loan sharks did not lend money to be repaid. They lent to trap people in a snare that tightened with every new moon. She had seen whole families lose homes, land, cattle, dignity. She had seen men become laborers on the very ranches that had once belonged to them. She had seen women accept arrangements called protection that the entire village knew the true meaning of. "We can sell the hens," she said sharply. "Sell the table. Sell what is left of your tools. I will put together what I earn washing clothes and making lace. We gather everything and offer an honest payment." "He will not accept it." Leon shook his head, and there was something worse than despair in the gesture. There was surrender. "Victor does not want pesos. He wants to break us." Celeste stood up too fast and had to brace herself against the table. "Do not speak like that in front of the boy." Her voice was low but sharp, the tone Karina recognized as her mother's last thread of control before crumbling. Javier stopped playing and looked at the three of them with the confused expression of a child who senses a storm but has not yet learned to name thunder. Karina went to him, placed a hand on her brother's thin shoulder, and spoke in a forcedly light whisper. "Go outside and see if Chata laid an egg. If she did, bring it to Mother." The boy nodded and ran out, the wooden car forgotten on the floor. When the door shut behind him, Karina turned to her father with an expression that did not allow half-truths. "What are you not telling us?" Leon ran a hand over his face in a gesture far too weary for a man his age. Celeste sat again, her hands clasped on her lap like someone praying but no longer expecting a miracle. "There is a way," her father murmured at last, and each word sounded torn from him with a rusty pair of pliers. "There is an old agreement that I should have used before, but I was ashamed. I had too much pride." A tingling climbed Karina's spine, that sense of being on the brink of hearing something that would change everything. "What agreement?" Leon opened his mouth to answer, but the sound of hooves striking the dry earth sliced through the air like a whip. 3 horses. By the sound, they were coming far too fast to be a social visit. Karina went to the narrow window and peered between the crooked wooden slats that served as shutters. She saw a tall, thin man dismount with the aggressive haste of someone arriving to collect a debt. Alejandro. He wore a leather vest over a sweat-stained shirt, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, and a long knife strapped to his belt. Behind him came 2 other men Karina did not recognize, both with hardened faces and the posture of those who had broken bones for less. "It is him," she said, her voice tense. Celeste stood too quickly again and had to steady herself on the table. Leon remained seated, his body hunched as if he had taken a punch to the gut. Karina drew a breath, straightened her apron, and went to the door before Alejandro could knock. She opened it slowly, planted herself in the doorway with her feet firm on the threshold, and lifted her chin in a gesture she had learned from watching men who pretended to have courage when they only had stubbornness. Alejandro stopped half a meter away, and the smell of him was cheap tobacco, sour sweat, and something worse, something that reminded her of rot, poorly masked by cheap cologne. He smiled, revealing yellowed, crooked teeth. "Karina Martinez," he said, dragging her name as though savoring stolen food. "You get prettier every day, girl. Shame beauty does not pay debt." She did not answer. She kept her eyes on him without blinking, without flinching, and saw his smile falter for a fraction of a second before returning. "Where is your father?" "Inside," Karina replied firmly. "But you are not coming in. Say what you need to say right there." Alejandro tilted his head, amused. "Oh, really? And who is going to stop me? You?" His manners. Karina did not move. "A man of honor does not enter someone's home uninvited. Or are you going to tell me you work for a man without honor?" The smile vanished. Alejandro spat on the ground, far too close to her foot to be accidental. But Karina did not move. One of the men behind him stepped forward, but Alejandro raised his hand in a gesture that meant, "Not yet." "Victor sent word," he said, his voice losing the varnish of fake politeness. "Tonight he is coming personally to settle the accounts, and he will not accept excuses anymore. Either 380 pesos come out of your hands, or he will collect his way." "We will pay what we can," Karina replied. "The principal plus 50 in interest. That is already more than fair." Alejandro laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Fair? Girl, those who owe have no honor to defend, and Victor is not asking for opinions. He is warning you. He took a step back, and before mounting his horse, he looked at her in a way that made Karina's skin go cold despite the heat. "Put on your prettiest dress tonight. You are getting an important visitor." They rode off at a heavy trot that kicked up clouds of dust and sent the hens squawking in fright. Karina remained standing there, her hands gripping the sides of her apron until her knuckles turned white. When she turned around, she saw Leon behind her, standing pale as candle wax. "Father, what did he mean by that?" she asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it out loud, wanting to force the man to admit it. Leon could not hold his daughter's gaze. Celeste appeared beside him, her trembling hands clutching the crucifix as if it were the only thing keeping the world from collapsing. "There is a man," Leon began, his voice breaking. "A rancher, Santiago Sanchez. He owns the El Altiplano Ranch, about 20 kilometers north. He helped me once, long ago, and he made a promise." A cold ripple ran up Karina's spine. "What kind of promise?" "He said that if we ever needed protection, he would give it, without asking the price." Leon swallowed hard, and when he lifted his eyes to his daughter, there was so much shame in them it seemed ready to overflow. "I wrote to him yesterday, sent the message with the mailboy. I asked for help. He replied this morning. He said he is coming tomorrow at dawn so we can talk." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Karina braced herself against the doorframe, her whole body taut like a guitar string pulled to the limit. "Protection how?" Her voice came out low. "Dangerous. Protection in exchange for what?" "Father?" Leon did not answer. He did not need to. Celeste covered her face with her hands, and this time there was no prayer, only a muffled sound that resembled surrender. It was then that Javier came running through the yard, his bare feet kicking up dust, a light brown egg cupped in both hands as if it were treasure. "I found one, Mama. Chata laid an egg." Karina looked at her brother, at that innocent smile and those eyes that still believed the world was fair, and something inside, her hardened like iron cooling after the forge. "Well done, Javi," she said, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. "Put it in the kitchen carefully." The boy ran inside, and Karina turned again to her father. "Tomorrow morning I will wake early and go to Don Ramirez's shop. I will ask if anyone needs clothes washed, lace made, anything at all. I will save every coin I can." "It will not be enough in time," Leon murmured. "Then we do what we can." Karina folded her arms, her jaw, "But I will not be used as bargaining currency, Father. And you will not offer me as payment for any debt." Celeste lifted her face, her eyes dry but filled with a pain that had existed long before this debt. "Daughter, sometimes we do not have a choice." "There is always a choice," Karina shot back, turning to walk inside. But before she could take 2 steps, a shout sliced through the air, coming from the main road. Karina recognized the voice of Chuy Morales, the village messenger, a small, jittery man who was always running from place to place, carrying news as if they were embers too hot to hold. He appeared at the corner, his hat crooked, his boots kicking up dust, his face flushed with a mix of panic and effort. When he spotted the Martinez house, he rushed even faster, nearly tripping over his own feet. Leon Martinez!" he shouted, breathless, stopping at the crooked wooden gate barely held by rusted hinges. Leon stepped outside with Karina beside him, and Celeste stayed at the door with Javier clinging to her skirt. "What is it, Chuy?" Leon asked, fear coating his voice, the kind of fear felt by those who already know the news will be bad. Chuy bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. When he looked up, his eyes were wide. "Victor," he said, spitting the word out between harsh breaths. "He is coming right now. He is not waiting until tonight." And he brought 6 men with him. Don Ramirez said he drank too much at the cantina and is shouting that tonight he will settle every outstanding debt in the village. Chuy swallowed hard, and his gaze flicked briefly to Karina before returning to Leon. "And he is saying he wants more than money. He wants human collateral." The air seemed to rush into Karina's lungs and refused to leave. Leon staggered, and she had to grab his arm to steady him. Celeste released a low, desperate groan and pulled Javier inside the house. Karina drew a deep breath, her nails digging into the skin of her own arm, and when she spoke, her voice was frighteningly calm. "How many minutes do we have?" 10, Chuy replied, his voice trembling. 15 at most. They were leaving the shop when I started running. Leon looked at his daughter, and in his eyes there were despair, guilt, and something far worse, the certainty that there was no escape. But Karina did not look away. She stared at the dirt road, at the rising dust marking the approach of horses, and then looked back at her father. Then we had better meet him standing. The sound of hooves arrived before the men did, striking the dry earth with the cruel regularity of a clock marking the final minutes of something that would never again be the same. Karina stood in the center of the room, her arms at her sides, her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails dug into her palms. Leon backed up until he touched the adobe wall, his body bent as if each hoofbeat were a punch to the stomach. Celeste pushed Javier into the back room and locked the door from inside, murmuring something that might have been a prayer or simply desperate words thrown into the wind in the hope that God was still paying attention. Chuy Morales took 3 steps back, holding his hat tight against his chest, his eyes darting from the house to the road and back again, as if calculating whether he still had time to run. But the horses were already turning the corner, 6 in total, raising a cloud of dust that turned the late afternoon into an orange, suffocating blur. At the front rode Victor, mounted on a wide-chested black horse, the reins held with the calmness of a man who knew no one would dare contest his arrival. Victor was around 48, his sunburned, angular face framed by a neatly trimmed gray mustache, too neat for a man who claimed to live by the sweat of honest work. He wore a leather vest over a once expensive white shirt, now stained with sweat beneath the arms, black trousers tucked into boots with spurs that jingled at each movement. On the little finger of his left hand glinted a gold ring with a red stone he claimed was ruby, though the entire village suspected it was painted glass. A revolver hung at his belt, not concealed but displayed, because men like Victor did not need to threaten with words when they could threaten simply by showing up. Beside him rode Alejandro, and behind them 4 other men Karina recognized from the cantina and the illegal gambling circles held in the abandoned warehouses near the mill. They were men who lived at the edges of the law, doing jobs no one signed on paper, but everyone knew who paid for. One of them, a short, broad-shouldered man with a scar on his chin, carried a rifle across his saddle. Another chewed tobacco and spat every 3 seconds, leaving dark stains in the dust. Victor dismounted with calculated calm, adjusted his vest, ran a hand over his mustache, and only then looked at the Martinez house as though assessing how much it would sell for at auction. He walked toward the gate with long strides, the metallic clicking of his spurs making the neighborhood dogs growl before crawling under carts to hide. Karina stepped outside before he could knock. She planted herself in the doorway, her bare feet firm on the worn wood, her arms crossed over her chest in a gesture that was half defense, half challenge. The sun hit her back, making her loose hair shine in tones of dark honey and copper, and for an instant Victor stopped, his eyes running over her silhouette in a way that made Karina's skin prickle with revulsion. "Karina Martinez," he said, his voice deep, drawn out, the kind that feigned politeness but hid poison underneath. "Every time I see you, girl, I wonder whether your father thanks heaven for having made something pretty in the middle of so much misery." She did not answer. She kept her eyes on him without flinching or blinking, and saw his smile falter for half a second before he restored it. "Where is Leon?" Victor asked, his voice losing its false softness. "Here," Leon replied, stepping out of the house with trembling legs but still upright. He stopped beside his daughter, and Karina smelled the cold sweat and fear radiating from her father like a contagious illness. Victor took 2 steps forward, stopping half a meter from the doorway, hooking his thumbs in, his belt, close enough to the revolver to show exactly where his hand could go if he wished. "Today is the day, Leon," he said, and there was no trace of cordiality left. 380 pesos. In my hand. Now. Leon swallowed hard, his Adam's apple rising and falling as if he were trying to choke down a stone. "I have 120. It is what I managed to gather by selling the tools, the hens, the 120? Victor tilted his head, pretending to be surprised. "Leon, do you think I am a charity fund? You think I lend money to hear stories about poverty?" He spat on the ground, close enough to Karina's bare foot to be intentional. "I gave you a year and a half. A year and a half, my friend. You had plenty of time. The interest eats everything," Karina said, her voice sharp. "You charge 12% a month. That is not a loan. That is robbery written on paper. Victor lifted his eyebrows, amused. Look at that. The girl. Learned to count. He took a step forward and crossed the threshold, invading the doorway without permission. You know what else I charge for, girl? Respect. And you are lacking it. Karina did not step back. She stood exactly where she was. Her chin lifted. Her eyes locked on his and saw something darken in his gaze. It was not desire. Not exactly. It was something worse. It was the sick pleasure of a man who enjoyed breaking things that were still whole. Leon stepped forward, placing himself between his daughter and the loan shark. Victor, please. I will give you the 120 now, and 60 more by the end of the month. It is all I can do. That is not what I want, Victor answered, his voice dropping an octave, becoming heavier and more dangerous. Money I can get from anyone. But do you know what is rare, Leon? Do you know what is worth more than pesos? He looked at Karina again, and this time he did not look away. Human collateral. The air felt as if it dropped 10 degrees instantly. Celeste appeared at the bedroom door, her face ashen, her hands gripping the wood as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Karina held her breath for a moment, not out of fear, but out of a rage so intense it burned from the inside. My daughter is not livestock, Leon said, his voice rough but steady for the first time that afternoon. No, Victor smiled, his teeth looking too large for his mouth. Then what is she? A lady of good family? With what money, Leon? With what name? You owe half the village, your house is falling apart, your boy walks barefoot, and your wife prays over an empty pot. He leaned forward, his face inches from Leon's. Your daughter is the only thing of value you have left, and I am being generous. I am offering a deal. What kind of deal? Karina asked before her father could speak. Victor turned to her slowly, his eyes traveling across her face with calculated slowness. Simple. You come work for me. 6 months in my house doing what I tell you without complaining, without running. At the end of that time, your father's debt is cleared. He is free. You are all free. Work how? Karina's voice came out hard as stone. Victor shrugged. Kitchen cleaning, whatever is needed. I have a big house. I need people to tend to it. He paused, his smile widening. And perhaps other things as well. Leon stepped forward, fists clenched, his whole body trembling with impotent rage. She will not go. Then you lose the house tomorrow morning, Victor replied with the ease of a man discussing the weather. And I guarantee Commander Herrera will find a way to arrest you for defaulting on your debt. You know how it works, Leon. You know I have the right men in the right places. Celeste released a muffled sound, something between a sob and a gasp, and had to steady herself against the wall. Karina looked at her mother, at her father, at the room where Javier was likely hiding with his hands over his ears, and felt something inside her harden. It was not resignation. It was resolution. Get out of my house, she said quietly, her voice carrying an authority she did not know she possessed. Victor blinked, surprised. What? Get out of my house? Karina stepped forward, and it was Victor who retreated this time, more by instinct than choice. You will not have an answer today. Come back tomorrow morning. Then we talk. The loan shark narrowed his eyes, his hand sliding closer to the revolver. You giving me orders, girl? I am giving you time, she answered. Or would you rather break down the door in front of the whole village and show everyone what kind of man you really are? Victor looked around. Chuy Morales was still there, hat pressed tight to his chest, eyes wide. At the window next door, Senora Bernarda peeked from behind torn curtains. 2 men stood at the corner pretending to fix. A wagon wheel, but clearly listening. The entire village would know by sundown, and Victor knew it. He spat on the ground again, this time with more rage than disdain. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. If I do not have an answer, I come into this house and take what is mine. He turned away, mounted his horse with a sharp movement, and struck the animal hard with his spurs. The others followed, and the sound of hooves slowly faded until it became only a bad memory hanging in the air. When the last horseman disappeared around the bend, Karina felt her legs weaken, but she did not fall. She held on to the doorframe, breathed deeply 3 times, then turned to her father. Now you tell me everything, she said, and do not leave anything out. Leon looked at his wife. Celeste nodded, her face still pale but her eyes dry, because women like her learned early that crying never solved anything. They entered the house, closed the door, and Leon walked to the corner where he kept an old wooden box with rusted hinges. He opened it slowly, took out an envelope and placed it on the table. "This here," he said, his voice breaking, "is a letter I wrote 8 days ago. I sent it to Santiago Sanchez, the owner of El Altiplano Ranch." Karina picked up the envelope and opened it carefully. The letter was written in trembling handwriting, on cheap paper stained with smeared ink. She read it under her breath, each word weighing on her tongue like lead. "Santiago, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after so long, but I am writing because I see no other way. The debt with Victor is crushing me, and he is threatening my family. I remember that years ago when Celeste was sick and I had no way to pay the doctor. You helped me. You said that if one day I needed help again, I only had to call. You said you owed me something because of an old story I never quite understood, but that you carried like a burden. I need help now. Santiago, I am asking for protection for my daughter. If you can help us, I will owe you my life. If you cannot, I understand. Leon Martinez." Karina lifted her eyes to her father, so many questions gathering there she did not even know where to start. "What old story?" Leon passed a hand over his face, too tired to lie. "It was 23 years ago. I worked on the lands of Don Rodrigo, Santiago's father. One day I saw a foreman stealing cattle and branding it as if it were being, sold off property. I told Don Rodrigo. The foreman was fired, but he had dangerous friends. He threatened my family. I had to leave the ranch, came here, started from nothing." He drew a long breath. Santiago never forgot. He said I had saved his family's honor, and that if one day I needed help, he would pay the debt. "And you never asked for anything?" Karina asked, incredulous. "I asked once, when your mother fell sick 6 years ago. He paid the doctor, paid for the medicine, and would not take a single peso back." Leon lowered his head. "I swore I would never ask again, but now I have no choice." Celeste approached the table, her trembling hands clutching its edge. "Santiago replied this morning. Chuy brought the letter." Leon took another envelope, this one newer, sealed with red wax already broken. He handed it to Karina, who opened it and read the reply. The handwriting was firm, each word written in high-quality black ink. "Leon, I received your letter. I will be there tomorrow morning so we can talk. I will bring a proposal. If your daughter accepts it, the debt with Victor ends tomorrow. If she does not, I will respect that. But know that the promise I made still stands, and I intend to honor it. Santiago Sanchez." Karina read the letter 3 times, each word embedding itself in her mind like a nail driven into wood. "What kind of proposal?" "I do not know," Leon admitted. "But I know Santiago. He is a hard man, but he is not Victor. He will not hurt you. He will not hurt me." Karina dropped the letter onto the table with force. "Father, you are offering me to him as payment for a debt. How does that not hurt?" "I am not offering you," Leon said, his voice rough, heavy with the despair he no longer managed to hide. "I am asking for help. That is different." "It is." Karina took 2 steps back, her arms folding tightly over her chest. "Because to me it looks exactly the same. Victor wants to use me to pay a debt. Santiago wants to use me to repay a promise. In the end, I am nothing but currency." "Daughter," Celeste began, but her voice died halfway through. Karina shook her head, walked to the window and stared at the empty street, at the dust still hanging in the air where Victor's horses had passed. The evening light painted the sky in orange and red, colors of a fire slowly fading. In the distance, a dog barked. A door slammed. Life continued as though nothing had happened, as though the entire world had not just turned upside down. "How long until Victor comes back?" she asked without turning around. "Until tomorrow morning," Leon replied. 7 o'clock. Karina stood at the window for a long moment, her shoulders tense, her breathing steady. When she turned, her face had changed. It was not resignation. It was something more dangerous. It was resolve. "I am going to El Altiplano Ranch," she said firmly. "Tonight. Now." Leon rose so fast the chair nearly toppled. "No, wait until tomorrow. Santiago said he would come." "I am not waiting." Karina walked to the bedroom, grabbed the cleanest shawl she owned, and draped it over her shoulders. She put on her worn boots, tied her hair into a tight bun, and returned to the room. If I'm going to be negotiated, then I want to be at the table. I am not staying here waiting for two men to decide what to do with me while I wring my hands and pray. Karina, Celeste tried, but her daughter was already at the door. Where is the ranch? Karina asked, looking at her father. Leon hesitated, but he knew it was useless to argue when his daughter wore that expression. About 20 kilometers north. Take the quarry road and turn left at the dry river fork. There is a stone gate with the ranch's name. How long on foot? About 5 hours. But with a wagon, I will go on foot. Karina adjusted the shawl, tucked a piece of bread into the cloth bag she used for carrying laundry, and headed for the door. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the worn wood, and looked back one last time. If Santiago gets here before I return, tell him I went to him. He did not come to me. That changes things. How does it change things? Leon asked, confused. Karina looked at him, and in her eyes there was a coldness he had never seen before. Because if I am going to hand over my life in exchange for this family's debt, then I do it by choice, not by force. And no one will ever say I was dragged. She left without waiting for a reply. She walked along the dirt road as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Senora Bernarda watched through her window, and Karina felt the woman's stare burn between her shoulder blades. But she did not turn. Chuy sat on the step of Don Ramirez's shop, and when he saw her, he jumped to his feet. "Karina, where are you going with that look on your face?" "To resolve what needs resolving," she answered without stopping. "Alone, at night?" Chuy ran after her, hat in hand. "Girl, this is madness. The road is not safe after dark. There are wolves, there are thieves, There is nothing worse than what is already waiting for me here," Karina cut in. "Go home, Chuy." He stopped in the middle of the street, watching her disappear around the bend, frozen with his hat pressed to his chest, unsure whether he should chase her or let her go. In the end, he did what he always did. He ran back to the sea. Shop and began spreading the news. Within half an hour, the entire village knew. Karina Martinez was heading to El Altiplano Ranch, alone, at night, and no one knew if she would return. The road was packed dirt, lined with dry shrubs and cacti that looked like crooked sentinels guarding nothing. Night fell quickly, as it always did in the desert, and the sky turned black, scattered with stars so dense they looked like flour thrown over a dark cloth. The moon was a thin crescent, giving just enough light for Karina to see the path, but not enough to chase away the fear gnawing at the edges of her courage. Her feet ached inside the worn boots. The sharp stones of the road stabbed through the thinning soles. The shawl did little to protect her from the cold that settled fast once the sun disappeared, but Karina did not stop. She put one foot in front of the other, breathed deep, and kept going. 2 hours later, when fatigue burned through her calves and her mouth felt as dry as sandpaper, she saw the stone gate. Tall, built of stacked gray blocks bonded with old mortar, with carved letters at the top reading El Altiplano Ranch. Beyond the gate, a broader, well-maintained dirt road snaked between barbed wire fences behind which cattle slept standing in the darkness. Far ahead, yellow lights flickered. The main house. Karina stopped there, at the gate, and for the first time since leaving home she hesitated. Her heart was beating too hard, too fast. Her hands were trembling, but it was not fear of what she would find. It was fear that once she crossed that gate she would never again be the same person. She breathed deeply, adjusted her shawl, lifted her chin, and stepped inside. The road leading to the main house of El Altiplano Ranch wound between dark wooden fences, where cattle slept standing, motionless shadows against the star-studded sky. Karina kept walking on aching feet, her old boots scraping against loose stones that rolled to the sides with every step. The night air smelled of dry earth, cured manure, and something wilder, something that drifted from the distant brushlands where coyotes sang a strange, eerie tune, too well-tuned to be comforting. The yellow lights she had seen from the gate now revealed themselves as square windows carved into the darkness, lit frames that promised warmth, food, and perhaps something far worse than the hunger she had left behind. The main house was 2 stories, tall, built of stone and adobe, with red-tiled roofing that glimmered under the moon like a serpent's scales, wide verandas with thick columns wrapped around the facade, and a heavy wooden door with wrought iron hinges guarded the entrance. The tall windows had real glass, unlike the patched-together scraps most village homes used. All around the house, smaller buildings formed a half-circle. Stables, a chicken coop, a warehouse with double doors, a forge where faint embers still glowed in the dark. Everything breathed order, constant work, and the kind of wealth that did not need to shout to be noticed. Karina stopped about 20 meters from the veranda, her legs trembling with exhaustion, her mouth too dry to swallow. She knew she should knock, announce herself, do things the proper way, but something held her there, rooted to the ground like a stake driven deep. Maybe it was the fear that once she knocked there would be no turning back. Maybe it was the anger of being there at all, negotiating her own life as though she were a sack of corn in a Saturday market. That was when the front door opened, and a man stepped out. Santiago Sanchez was 37, with the bearing of someone who had learned early that hesitating was a luxury reserved for those without heavy responsibilities. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a white linen shirt with rolled sleeves, revealing sun-darkened forearms marked by muscles formed through real work, not vanity. Dark trousers of good fabric, well-kept but worn boots, and a belt with a simple buckle that made no attempt to impress. His hair was black, slightly wavy, tousled in a way that suggested he had run his fingers through it more than once in the past hours. His face was angular, his jaw strong beneath a 2-day beard that shadowed his already bronzed skin, and his eyes held a greenish tone that looked like muted gray depending on the light. He paused on the veranda, one hand braced against a wooden column, and stared at the lone figure standing in the middle of the path, as though trying to decide if she was real or a mirage carried by the desert wind. "Who is there?" His voice was deep, controlled, the kind that did not need to be raised in order to be obeyed. Karina stepped forward, leaving the shadows and entering the faint spill of light from the windows. Karina Martinez, Leon's daughter. Santiago remained perfectly still for 2 full seconds. Then he descended the 3 steps from the veranda with long strides and stopped about 5 meters from her, close enough to see her face, far enough not to intrude. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes running over her figure with an assessment that was not desire but calculation. "You walked 20 kilometers alone at night," he said. "I did." "Why?" Karina lifted her chin, her arms resting at her sides, her hands curled into loose fists. "Because if I am going to be negotiated, I want to be at the table when the deal is made." Santiago studied her face for a long moment, and something flickered in his eyes, something that could have been respect or surprise, or simply the exhaustion of a day that had lasted too long. "Does your father know you are here?" "He knows I left. I do not know if he approves." "And your mother?" "She is probably praying." Karina shrugged. It is what she does when she has no control over anything. One corner of Santiago's mouth lifted in a ew, half smile that died before it could fully form. He ran a hand through his hair, further mussing it, and exhaled deeply. "Come in. You must be hungry." "I am." "Thirsty?" "Also." "Then come. We will talk after you have eaten." He turned and walked inside without looking back, trusting she would follow. And Karina followed, because she had nowhere else to go. She climbed the veranda steps, crossed the heavy wooden doorway, and entered a world completely unlike her own. The interior smelled of beeswax, well-cared-for leather, roasted coffee, and something faintly floral drifting from a vase of dried flowers on a side table. The floor was made of wide dark wood planks, polished by years of use rather than luxury. The walls held simple paintings, desert landscapes, and an oval portrait of a young woman with dark hair, and a timid smile hung above the stone fireplace. The furniture was solid and functional, built to last generations. There were no unnecessary ornaments, but neither was there poverty. Everything said the owner worked hard yet reaped enough to live with dignity. Santiago led her down a hallway into a spacious kitchen where a woman in her early 50s stirred a pot on a wood-burning stove. She was short and round, her body shaped by age and good food, gray hair tied into a loose bun, an apron cinched around her broad waist. When she heard footsteps, she turned, and her light brown eyes widened at the sight of Karina. "Holy Virgin," she murmured, dropping the wooden spoon. "Where did this girl come from?" "Elena, this is Karina Martinez, Leon's daughter." Santiago pulled out a chair from the wide pine table at the center of the kitchen. She walked all night. She needs food. Elena asked no questions. She took a clay plate and filled it with seasoned beans, shredded meat, white rice, and 2 warm tortillas still releasing steam. She placed everything in front of Karina, along with a cup of cool, fresh water that sweated down the sides. "Eat, girl, and slowly or it will hurt." Karina took the spoon and ate, not slowly as instructed, but with the desperate hunger of someone who did not know when she would have another meal. The beans were flavored with cumin and mild chili. The meat melted on her tongue, and the rice carried real butter. It was the best food she had tasted in months, and she had to force herself not to devour it without chewing. Santiago sat across the table, arms crossed over the wood, watching her completely. Elena lingered near the stove, pretending to stir the pot but clearly listening to every movement, every breath, every unspoken word hanging in the air like heavy smoke. When Karina cleaned her plate for the second time, Elena refilled it without asking. "More water? Please." The cook topped off the cup, this time adding a squeeze of fresh lemon. "Drink it all. Walking the desert dries a person from the inside out." Karina drank, feeling the cool water slide down her throat and calm the fire burning in her stomach. When she finished, she set the cup down, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and finally looked directly at Santiago. "Now we talk." He nodded slowly. "Elena, give us a moment." The cook hesitated, her eyes flicking from Santiago to Karina and back again. "Leave the door open," she said. "Not a suggestion. I do not want gossip." "I will," Santiago agreed. Elena stepped out but remained in the UE hallway, close enough to hear if anyone shouted. Santiago waited until her footsteps softened before he spoke. "Why did you come?" "Because my father wrote asking for protection," Karina answered, her voice steady. "And you replied offering a proposal. I came to hear the proposal, and to decide whether I accept it." Santiago laced his fingers on the table, his body leaning slightly forward. "You know your father owes me an old debt. He told me. The thieving foreman, your family, the threat 23 years ago. And you know I paid for your mother's doctor 6 years ago." "I know. Then you know I take promises seriously." Santiago held her gaze. "When your father wrote to me, I could have ignored it. I could have sent money and left him to deal with the rest. But that is not what I chose." "What did you choose?" Karina asked, her voice edged with challenge. "I thought of a solution that protects your family from Victor while repaying my debt of honor." He drew a slow breath. "Marriage." The word fell into the kitchen like a stone dropped into a deep well. Karina did not blink. "Marriage. Yes. With me. Yes." She leaned back in the chair, her arms crossed over her chest. "And how exactly does marrying me solve my father's debt with Victor?" "Because I pay the full debt the moment we sign the papers," Santiago replied, with the same calm as someone talking about the weather. 380 pesos, interest included. I take the money myself, settle everything, get a signed receipt. Victor will hold nothing over your family. In exchange for me. In exchange for a real marriage, with a priest, with witnesses, with documents registered at the courthouse. Santiago did not look away. "It is not purchase, it is agreement." Karina let out a sound that was almost a laugh, but with no humor at all. "Agreement. You call an agreement what everyone else will call a sale. Let them call it whatever they want." His voice hardened just a fraction. "I know what it is. You know what it is. The rest does not matter." "It does matter." Karina leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her eyes locked on his. "It matters because I will have to live in that village for the rest of my life, hearing that I was sold for a sack of flour and 380 pesos. It was not flour. It was a debt of honor." Santiago held her gaze without flinching. "And if you accept, you will live here, not in the village. You will be the mistress of this house, this land, this name. No one will dare say anything to your face, but they will talk behind my back. They always do." He shrugged. "They talk about everyone. They have talked about me ever since Mariana died. They say I should have remarried, that it is a sin to live alone, that the ranch needs children. I hear it and pretend I do not. You learn." Karina studied his face, searching for lies, for traps. for anything that suggested this was worse than it appeared, but all she saw was a tired man, carrying weight that was not entirely his, trying to do the right thing in the crooked way life offered. "And what do you gain from this?" she asked. Santiago hesitated for the first time since the conversation had begun. He passed a hand over his face, rubbed his eyes with his thumb and forefinger, and when he answered, his voice came out lower. "I pay a debt that has followed me for 23 years. Your father saved my family's honor. My father died without paying that back, now I do." "But why marriage?" Karina pressed. "Why not just give the money?" "Because money ends. Victor comes back, and next time, he will not collect debt. He will collect you." Santiago looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Marriage protects you for real, because you take my name, my house, my money, and no one touches what is mine." The way he said mine made something strange happen. In Karina's chest, a feeling that was not entirely bad but frightened her anyway. She looked away, pretending to study the portrait of the woman above the fireplace. "Who is she?" Santiago followed her gaze. "Mariana, my wife. She died 8 years ago." "Of what?" "Fever. The doctor could not say what kind. She fell ill on a Monday, and by Friday she was gone." His voice grew too neutral, the tone of someone who has learned to retell a painful story without feeling it. It was fast. "They say that is better. I am not sure I agree." Karina turned back to him. "Did you love her?" "I did. And now you want to marry me. I want to protect you. That is different." "Is it?" Karina tilted her head. "Because it sounds to me like you are trying to fix an old guilt with a new solution. And I am the tool." Santiago went completely still for 3 full seconds. Then he stood, walked to the window, and stared out into the dark courtyard. His posture was tense, shoulders rigid, hands shoved into his pockets. When he spoke, he did not turn around. "You are right. I am trying to fix an old guilt, but I do not see you as a tool. I see you as the only person in this whole mess who has the courage to tell the truth to someone's face." Karina blinked, surprised. "You walked 20 kilometers at night," he continued, still facing the window. "Alone. So you would not be negotiated without being present. That is not something a weak woman does. That is something a woman who knows her worth does. Someone who does not let others decide for her." He turned, and his eyes looked different, clearer, as if a door had opened. "If you accept this marriage, you will not come as a servant. You will come as a mistress. Of the house, of the money, of the decisions. I do not want a woman who bows her head. I already had that. Mariana was good, but she was too quiet. You are not." Karina did not know whether that was a compliment or a criticism. "And if I do not accept, I give your father the money anyway," Santiago answered without hesitation. "I pay the debt with Victor, find Leon work on a ranch owned by a friend of mine, help your family leave the village if needed, and you remain free to do whatever you want. Why? Because I do not hold anyone captive." He took 2 steps toward the table but stopped before coming too close. "And because the debt is mine to your father, not his to me. He saved me. I pay. It is that simple." Karina stared at him, and for the first time since entering that house, she felt that perhaps there was a path forward that was not complete ruin. Not good. Not what she had dreamed of at 12, imagining she would grow up, marry someone she loved, have children, and die old surrounded by grandchildren. But better than Victor. Better than watching her family fall apart. Better than losing everything. "I have conditions," she said. Santiago raised one eyebrow. "Speak." "First, I sleep in a separate room until I decide otherwise. I accept. Second, I help around the house, but I am not a maid. I have a voice in the decisions. I accept. Third, if at any point I want to leave, you do not stop me." Santiago hesitated. "And the debt? It stays paid. You said you would pay it regardless, so that changes nothing." He considered this for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on her. Then he nodded slowly. "I accept, but only after 6 months. 6 months you stay, try. If after that you still want to go, I will not hold you." Karina turned the proposal over in her mind from every angle. 6 months was enough time for the village to forget a little of the scandal. Enough time for her parents to rebuild something resembling a dignified life. and enough time to discover whether Santiago was a man of his word or just another well-dressed liar. 6 months, she agreed. But there is one more condition. What is it? You do not touch me unless I want it. Not a finger. Not once. Santiago's eyes darkened, and for a second Karina thought he might refuse, but then he extended his hand across the table, palm open, waiting. Agreement made. Karina looked at his hand. It was large, calloused with fine scars that came from work, not from fighting. His nails were clean but short, cut with a knife. There was a trace of dark earth beneath one of them that even scrubbing had not removed. It was the hand of a man who did not fear labor. She extended her own hand and shook his. The touch was firm, dry, direct, and when their fingers met, something passed between them, something electric and uncomfortable and impossible to name. Karina pulled her hand back too quickly, and she saw Santiago do the same. Elena appeared in the doorway as if she had waited for the exact moment. Is it settled? It is, Santiago answered, his voice returning to its controlled tone. She will stay. Prepare the guest. Room? And the wedding? Saturday. 3 days. Enough time to notify the priest and arrange the paperwork. Elena nodded, satisfied. I will get clean clothes for the girl. She cannot sleep in those road-stained rags. The cook left, and Karina found herself alone with Santiago again. The air in the kitchen felt heavier now, dense with unspoken things, half-formed promises, uncertain futures. Santiago ran a hand through his hair one more time, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as nervousness disguised as habit. Do you want to send word to your father? He asked. Tomorrow morning, I want to tell him in person. I will take you by cart. That is not necessary. It is necessary. Santiago held her gaze without blinking. The entire village probably already knows you came here alone at night. If you go back alone again, they will say I used you and threw you away. I am going with you. We will speak to your father together, and we will return. Together. Karina wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The village was small, tongues were long, and a woman's honor was a fragile thing that shattered with the slightest breath. All right. Elena returned with a simple light blue cotton dress, clean but old, likely one of Mariana's. Take a bath first. There is hot water in the tank out back, and real soap, not that ash rubbish. Karina took the dress, feeling the soft fabric between her fingers, and for the first time in hours allowed the exhaustion to hit her fully. Her legs trembled, her back ached, her head felt heavy, but she let none of it show. She nodded to Elena, gave Santiago one last look, and followed the cook down the corridor. The bath was quick, the hot water burning the cold desert night off her skin, the lavender-scented soap stripping away layers of dust and sweat and fear. When Karina put on the clean cotton dress and let her wet hair fall down her back, she felt almost human again. Almost. Elena led her to a small room at the end of the hall, with an iron bed and a straw mattress, a plain nightstand, a narrow window looking out onto the courtyard, and a wooden cross hanging on the wall. Sleep, girl. Tomorrow will be a long day. Karina lay down on the bed without taking off her boots. She stared at the ceiling beams darkened by time, listening to the house settling into night around her. Santiago's heavy steps climbing the stairs, Elena extinguishing the lamps, one by one, a dog barking far away, the wind tapping against something metallic that groaned in a monotone rhythm. She did not sleep for hours. She lay there with her eyes open, her mind running in circles, trying to understand how in less than 12 hours her life had been turned completely upside down. In the morning, she had been the daughter of Leon Martinez, laundress and lace maker of San Miguel del Valle. Now she was the fiancée of a widowed rancher she had met 3 hours earlier, a man who had promised to protect her from a violent moneylender in exchange for a marriage without love but with respect. Or so he said. Karina turned onto her side, facing the window where the crescent moon sliced the sky into thin ribbons of silver light. She thought of her father, her mother, Javier. She thought of what it would be like to return home tomorrow and tell them she was marrying a stranger to save the family. She thought of what the village would say, how Victor would react, how Santiago would keep the promises he had made in a rushed kitchen conversation. And she thought, with a cold weight settling in her stomach, that perhaps she had just made the worst decision of her life, or perhaps the only decision possible. She did not yet know. Outside, in the darkness of the Mexican desert, a coyote let out a long, mournful howl, and Karina, alone in the guest room of a ranch that was not hers, finally closed her eyes. Meanwhile, in a smaller building across the courtyard, Adrian finished removing the saddle from the horse he would ride into the village the next morning. He had been foreman for 7 years and knew every inch of that land, every ranch hand, every cow, every debt, every secret. And now he had witnessed something he had not expected. A girl arriving at night, Santiago letting her stay, Elena preparing a room, and the news, gathered from whispered corners, that there would be a wedding. Adrian spat on the ground, displeased. He had plans that involved earning the boss's trust, rising in position, perhaps even marrying a daughter of some neighboring rancher and becoming a partner one day. But now there was a woman in the way, and worse, Victor paid well for information. Adrian smiled in the dark, running a hand along the rough stubble on his jaw. Information was worth gold, and he had a fresh one ready on the tip of his tongue. He mounted his horse and rode toward the village, leaving behind a trail of dust that the moonlight traced like silver crumbs. Tomorrow Santiago would know, but before that, the entire village would know, and gossip once released was impossible to cage again. Thursday morning rose beneath an aggressive sun that turned the dust on the road into a golden haze and sent the dogs searching for shade before 7 o'clock. At El Altiplano Ranch, Karina woke to the smell of strong coffee and tortillas baking, sounds drifting from the kitchen and climbing the adobe walls to the guest room where she had spent the strangest night of her life. She had slept poorly, her body sinking into the straw mattress that was far too soft compared to the hard floor she was used to, her head buzzing with thoughts that refused to let her rest. She stood, adjusted the borrowed blue dress that smelled of lavender and something older, perhaps memories of another woman who had worn that fabric before. She tied her hair in a loose bun, washed her face in the cold water Elena had left in a basin on the nightstand, and went downstairs to the kitchen, where Santiago was already seated at the table with a mug of coffee in hand and half a piece of bread on his plate. He lifted his eyes when she entered, and for a fraction of a second Karina saw something in his gaze she could not name. It was not desire, nor appraisal. It was closer to recognition, as if he were beginning to grow accustomed to the idea that she was there and not about to disappear. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice rough with the remnants of mourning. "I did," Karina lied, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. Elena appeared with a full plate, steaming coffee, and a tired smile from someone who had been awake long before sunrise. "Eat, girl. We leave in half an hour. Your father must be chewing his nails down to the bone since last night." Santiago finished his coffee in one swallow, rose and adjusted his belt. "I am going to hitch the cart. Prepare a basket of food, Elena. They must be in need." The cook nodded, and Karina felt something tighten in her stomach. It was not gratitude exactly, but something near it, and she was not sure she liked being indebted to a man she barely knew. 27 minutes later, they were on the road back to San Miguel del Valle. The cart was simple, pulled by 2 dark-coated, strong-legged horses, with wooden benches covered by thick fabric that protected from the sun but not from the heat. Santiago held the reins with steady hands, the wide-brimmed hat shading his face, and Karina sat beside him with the basket of food on her lap, watching the landscape glide by. They did not talk much. The sound of wheels on packed earth, the occasional neigh of the horses, and the distant birdsong filled the space where words might have been. Karina preferred it that way. She had too many things in her head to force polite conversation with a man who would be her husband in 3 days. They had just reached the fork near the dry riverbed, about 8 kilometers from the village, when they saw the first sign that the news had already spread. Adrian was returning on horseback, coming from the opposite direction, and when he spotted the cart, he pulled the reins and stopped beside them. His face was sweaty, his hat crooked, and in his eyes Karina immediately recognized poorly concealed guilt. "Boss," he said, his voice coming out too quickly. "Returning from the village?" "Going," Santiago corrected, his eyes narrowing. "What were you doing there?" "Getting provisions," Elena asked. Elena said nothing to me. Adrian blinked, his lie stumbling on his own tongue. She must have forgotten. She was busy with the With the guest, he looked at Karina, and his gaze swept her from head to toe far too fast to be respectful. Santiago saw it. Something hardened in his expression. Go back to work. There is a broken fence. In the south pasture. Yes, sir. Adrian spurred the horse and rode away, kicking up far more dust than necessary for a man in no hurry. Karina waited until he had disappeared around the bend before speaking. He was lying. I know. And what are you going to do? Santiago flicked the reins again, setting the cart in motion. Nothing yet. But I will keep watch. He glanced sideways at her. Adrian is a good foreman, but he has too much ambition. And ambition without restraint becomes trouble. They arrived in San Miguel del Valle an hour later, and the village was already buzzing with the news. Senora Bernarda, who lived 3 houses down from the Martinez family, stood at her window pretending to shake a rug, but very clearly watching the street. When she saw Santiago's cart stop in front of Leon's house, she dropped the rug and rushed inside, likely to alert her husband and anyone else with ears within reach. Don Ramirez, owner of the main grocery store, stood at the doorway with his arms crossed and an expression of someone witnessing unfolding drama and uncertain whether to approve or disapprove. When Santiago stepped down from the cart and helped Karina climb down, the shopkeeper gave a curt nod that might have been a greeting or simply acknowledgement. The door to the Martinez home opened before Karina could knock. Leon appeared, his face more aged than the day before, his eyes hollow from a night without sleep. Behind him, Celeste held Javier by the hand, and the boy looked at his sister with a mix of confusion and fear. "Daughter," Leon said, his voice cracking. "Thank God." Karina entered, and Santiago remained outside, hat in hand, waiting to be invited in. Leon made a quick gesture. "Come in, Santiago, come in." The rancher stepped inside, and the house felt smaller around him, not because he was arrogant, but because men accustomed to large spaces always seemed too big for small ones. He removed his hat, passed a hand through his hair, and stood near the door, respectful of the space that was not his. "Mr. Leon," Santiago began, his voice formal, "I came to bring your daughter back and to ask permission to speak with you and Mrs. Celeste about the agreement." "Agreement?" Celeste's voice came out thin, almost a whisper. Karina drew a deep breath. "Mother, I agreed to marry him." The world seemed to stop. Leon closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, relief and guilt were mixed. There, in a painful proportion, Celeste released Javier's hand and fell into the nearest chair, her legs giving out. The boy looked from his sister to the rancher and back, trying to understand what was happening. "Karina is getting married?" Javier asked. "She is," Karina answered, kneeling in front of him and holding his thin shoulders. "And it will be good. Mr. Santiago is going to help us. He will pay the debt owed to the bad man. You will all be safe. But you are leaving?" "I will live at the ranch, but I will visit often. I promise." Javier nodded slowly, not fully understanding but accepting it because children often accept what adults say when adults seem too certain to question. Karina kissed his forehead and stood, turning to her parents. "How much time do we have before Victor returns?" she asked. "He said he was coming back this morning," Leon answered. 7 o'clock. It is already past that. As if the universe had been waiting for its cue, loud. Pounding on the door made everyone jump. Santiago stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between the door and Karina. Leon opened it, and on the other side stood Chuy Morales, the messenger, his face red from running and his eyes wide. "Leon! Santiago!" He was breathless. "Victor is at Don Ramirez's store. He arrived 10 minutes ago with Alejandro and 3 more men. He is saying he came to collect the human guarantee, and if he does not get it, he will bring Commander Herrera to arrest Leon for default." Santiago exchanged a quick look with Karina. "Is he armed?" "All of them are," Chuy replied. "And there is more. Adrian was there last night. He said the girl went up to the ranch alone, that she spent the night, that there was an agreement between you." Victor exploded. "He said he is going to the registry today to falsify papers, invent a bigger debt, and arrest everyone if necessary." Karina's heart stumbled inside her chest. "Falsify? He does it," Leon said, his voice bitter. "He has done it to other families. Changes numbers, changes dates, changes signatures. The clerk at the registry is his friend. Turns a blind eye." Santiago placed his hat back on his head, his face hardening into a mask of determination. He is still at the grocery store? He was when I ran out, Chui confirmed. Then we settle this now. Santiago turned to Karina. You stay here with your family. I will speak with him. No. Karina grabbed the shawl thrown over the chair and tied it around her shoulders. I am going with you. That is not a good idea. I did not ask for an opinion. She stepped past him and out the door before anyone could stop her. Santiago muttered a low curse Elena would not have approved of, but followed. Leon hesitated, looked at his wife, and Celeste made a small gesture with her hand that meant, go, but come back in one piece. He grabbed his hat and went after them. The grocery store owned by Don Ramirez was 3 blocks away, and by the time they arrived, half the village was crowded outside, pretending to shop but clearly eager to witness the spectacle. Senora Bernarda had secured a privileged spot near the window, her fan tapping nervously against her palm. Don Isandro, the traveling vendor, sat in his wagon chewing tobacco and spitting on the ground every 7 seconds. Victor was inside, leaning against the dark wooden counter where Don Ramirez kept his account book open, his face stretched with deep discomfort. Alejandro stood beside his boss, and 3 other men occupied strategic corners of the store, all armed, all with the posture of men who expected trouble. When Santiago entered with Karina and Leon behind him, the air grew heavier. Victor lifted his eyes slowly, a cold smile curling at the corner of his mouth. Well, well, he drawled. The shining savior arrives, and he brought his lady companion. Victor, Santiago said, his voice neutral but weighted with authority. I came to pay Leon's debt. All of it today. Oh, really? Victor leaned forward on the counter, his eyes roaming over Karina in a way that made her skin crawl with disgust. And what about the agreement I made yesterday? I do not recall releasing the human guarantee. There was no agreement. Karina cut in before Santiago could speak. You made a threat. That is different. Victor laughed. A dry, unpleasant sound. Girl, you have no idea who you are talking. Yes, I do. I am talking to a loan shark who forges papers and buys corrupt authority. Karina stepped forward, and this time it was Santiago who caught her arm. Not forcefully, but in warning. Easy, he murmured. Victor slammed his hand on the counter, making Don Ramirez jump. Forge, do you have proof, girl? Not yet, she replied, holding his stare. But I will. Enough. Santiago released her arm and faced Victor. How much is the debt? 380 pesos. I pay it? Now, in front of witnesses. Santiago took a thick envelope from the inside pocket of his vest and set it on the counter. Count it. Seeing a chance to end the situation before it bled into violence, Don Ramirez grabbed the envelope and began counting the notes. Victor watched, jaw clenched, fingers drumming on the counter. 380, the merchant confirmed, his voice trembling slightly. It is all here. Then the debt is settled, Santiago said. Write the receipt, Don Ramirez, and let it be recorded in front of everyone here that Leon Martinez owes Victor nothing. The merchant pulled out paper, dipped the quill in ink, and began writing in careful script. Victor watched each word being shaped, and when Don Ramirez finished and extended the receipt to Santiago, the loan shark stepped forward. It is paid, he said, voice low and dangerous. But there is another debt. What debt? Leon asked, his voice shaking. Victor took a folded document from his vest pocket, opened it with slow, theatrical movements and set it on the counter. This one, promissory note signed by you, Leon, 2 years ago. 200 pesos borrowed, 13% monthly interest, total due, 620 pesos. Leon turned pale. I never signed that. Your signature is right here. Victor pointed at the paper. See? Your name? Your handwriting. Santiago picked up the document, studied it closely, and his eyes narrowed. This is forged. Prove it, Victor challenged. The L is crooked. Leon writes with a straight L. Opinion. Forensic analysis, Santiago countered. We take this to the capital. A handwriting specialist will confirm it. Victor smiled, and the smile dripped poison. That will take months. And meanwhile, Leon still owes, and unpaid debt becomes jail. He turned to Alejandro. Go get Commander Herrera. Tell him we have a debtor here who needs arrest. Alejandro hesitated. glanced at Santiago, then slipped out the side door. Karina felt the world tilt again, that sensation of being on a storm-tossed boat without oars or direction. But before she could speak, the door opened again, and this time it was Father Esteban, the village priest, a man in his 60s with a worn cassock and a battered Bible tucked under his arm. "I heard a commotion," he said. "I came to see if someone needed blessing or separating." "Father," Victor said with false politeness, "no need. Merely business. Business involving threats of arrest is not business, Victor. It is extortion." The priest looked around, saw the promissory note in Santiago's hand, and extended his own. "May I?" Santiago handed it over. The priest studied the paper, adjusted his round spectacles on his nose, then looked at Leon. "Did you sign this?" "No, Father. I swear to God." The priest nodded slowly, returned the paper to Santiago, and turned to Victor. "Forging documents is a grave sin, Victor, and a crime as well. I did not forge anything. Then you will not mind proving it in court." The priest crossed his arms. "And until then, I suggest you step back before you lose your soul entirely." Victor opened his mouth to reply, but the door swung open again. Alejandro returned with Commander Herrera, a short, stout man with a poorly fitted uniform and a thick mustache that looked like black glue pasted above his lip. He surveyed the room with small, calculating eyes, the kind that measured everyone's worth before choosing sides. "Commander," Victor said, sweetening his tone, "we have a debtor here. Leon Martinez owes 620 pesos, refuses to pay." "I do not owe," Leon shot back. "That paper is false." Herrera took the promissory note, pretended to study it, then handed it back to Victor. "Looks legitimate to me." "Because you do not want to see the truth," Santiago said, stepping forward. "And everyone here knows you have been taking bribes from Victor for years." The commander flushed red. "Watch what you say, rancher." "Or what?" Santiago did not back down. "You will arrest me for telling the truth?" The tension in the grocery store rose tenfold. The people outside pressed closer to the windows, straining to hear and see. Senora Bernarda practically had her head wedged into the crack of the door. That was when Chuy Morales appeared again, breathless, calling from outside. Victor went to the registry office. Secretary Valdez confirmed it. He filed fake documents. There are 3 promissory notes in Leon's name that Leon never signed. The world seemed to freeze. Victor did not move, his face draining of color. Herrera looked at the loan shark, and for the first time there was hesitation in his small eyes. Santiago folded his arms, waiting. "Looks like the tables have turned," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Well, Victor?" The loan shark spat on the floor, grabbed the envelope of money still in Don Ramirez's hand, and shoved it into his pocket. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Karina said, her voice slicing through the air like a sharp blade. "Because on Saturday I am marrying Santiago, and when I marry I take his name, his protection, his money. And if you ever come after my family again, you will have to face the entire El Altiplano ranch." Victor stared at her, his eyes filled with pure hatred. "You will regret this, girl. I already regret many things," she replied without blinking. "But you will not be one of them." The loan shark turned and stormed out, Alejandro and the other 3 men trailing behind like obedient shadows. When the door slammed shut after them, the grocery store erupted in murmurs. Senora Bernarda burst in like a whirlwind, her eyes shining with poorly disguised curiosity. "Is it true, Karina? You are marrying the rancher?" "I am." "This Saturday?" "This Saturday." The woman broke into a wide smile, as if she had just received a birthday present. "Holy Virgin! This will be a story to tell until next year." Father Esteban raised his hand, asking for attention. "There is a wedding scheduled, but preparation is needed. Santiago, Karina, will you come to the church tomorrow morning so we can talk?" "We will," Santiago confirmed. The priest nodded, satisfied, and left the grocery store, blessing half a dozen people along the way. Commander Herrera muttered something about having important work to do and slipped out before anyone could ask more questions. Don Ramirez stored the money, closed the account book, and let out a relieved sigh. "Thank God it ended without gunfire," he murmured. Santiago took the receipt, folded it carefully, and handed it to Leon. Keep this somewhere safe. It is proof that you owe nothing." Leon accepted the paper with trembling hands, and when he looked at Santiago, there was gratitude and shame intermingled in his eyes. "I do not know how to thank you. Take care of your family," the rancher replied, "and trust that I will take care of your daughter." Karina heard that and felt something strange stir in her chest, something not entirely unwelcome, but frightening, because it meant she was beginning to trust a man she had known for less than a day, and trust was dangerous. A broken trust hurt more than never having trusted at all. They left the grocery store under the gazes of half the village. Chue was darting from one side to the other, recounting the story to anyone who would listen, and Senora Bernarda was already on her second exaggerated version of the events. But Karina did not care. Let them talk. Let them embellish. In the end, truth would survive, because truth always survived when stubborn people were willing to defend it. And Karina Martinez, daughter of Leon and Celeste, washerwoman and lace-maker of San Miguel del Valle, was stubborn enough for anything. They returned to the house, and this time Santiago did not go inside. He remained outside, hat in hand, waiting. Karina said goodbye to her family, promised she would return before the wedding, and climbed into the wagon beside him. They set off under a sun that was already beginning to sink, painting the sky in orange and red, colors of late afternoon that smelled of dust and uncertain promises. On the way back, neither spoke much, but when the El Altiplano ranch came into view on the horizon, Santiago broke through the weight in the air. "You were brave today." Karina glanced at him sideways. "I was bold. It is different." "It is not." He smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done even with fear eating you from the inside." She did not answer, but she stored those words in a corner of her mind where important things were kept, and when they arrived, Elena was already on the porch, her apron dusted with flour, hands on, her hips wearing an expression that was half relief and half reproach. "Took you long enough," she said. "I thought you had died on the way." "Almost," Santiago replied as he stepped down from the wagon. "But we are more stubborn than death," Elena huffed, but she smiled. And Karina, climbing down as well, felt for the first time since everything had begun that perhaps things would not end in complete disaster. But there were still 3 days left until the wedding, and much could happen in 3 days. Friday dawned with low clouds that threatened rain but never fulfilled the promise, leaving the air heavy and charged with an electricity that made the horses whinny restlessly in the corrals. Santiago woke before sunrise, as he always did, and went straight to the stables to check the fences that Adrian was supposed to have fixed, but were still down in the southern pasture. The foreman had been disappearing far too often, showing up only at mealtimes and vanishing again right after with flimsy excuses about checking the cattle or inspecting the borders of the property. Karina spent the morning helping Elena in the kitchen, kneading dough for tortillas with her hands covered in flour, while the cook told stories about how the ranch had been when Mariana was still alive, how the house once held laughter and music and celebrations that lasted until dawn. Now everything was quiet, far too quiet, as if the death of Santiago's wife had taken away not only the woman but the life that pulsed through the walls. "He was different before," Elena said, stirring a pot of beans with a wooden spoon. "He laughed more, talked more. Mariana had this way of making him forget he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders." Karina shaped another ball of dough between her palms. "And after she died, he turned to stone." Elena sighed. "Not that stone is bad. Stone holds a house upright, but stone does not warm anyone at night." Their conversation was interrupted by hooves pounding hard in the courtyard. Santiago entered through the side door, his expression set, a folded letter in hand. "Chuy just brought this. It's from the registry office." He opened the paper and read aloud, his voice neutral but edged with tension. "Mr. Sanchez, we inform you that Mr. Leon Martinez has pending debts registered in this office totaling 940 pesos, referring to 3 unpaid promissory notes. We request urgent appearance for regularization. Sincerely, Secretary Valdez." Karina dropped the dough. 940? Yesterday it was 620 on the fake promissory note. Now there are more? Victor is raising the stakes. Santiago said, crushing the paper in his hand. "He wants to force us to go to the registry office. He wants a public spectacle." "Then we go," Karina replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "And we make a spectacle back." Santiago looked at her. With that expression she was beginning to recognize, halfway between surprise and something more complicated, that he never let fully surface. "You do not need to go. I will handle it." "Yes, I do. He is my father. My name. My fight." She removed the apron, hung it on the hook, and fixed the strands of hair escaping her bun. "Are we going now?" "Now." Santiago grabbed his hat, adjusted the revolver at his belt in a way that was not a threat but a warning, and called for Adrian, who appeared out of nowhere as he always seemed to these days. "Saddle 2 horses. We are riding to the registry office." The foreman hesitated, his gaze evasive. "Patron, I can go fetch the witnesses you asked for yesterday." "I did not ask for any witnesses." Santiago cut him off, his voice cold as ice. "Saddle the horses, now." Adrian swallowed hard and ran out. Elena appeared with a clean shawl and threw it over Karina's shoulders. "If you're going to face a snake, you go looking proper." The ride to San Miguel del Valle took 40 minutes, with Karina riding a gentle bay mare that Santiago said was the calmest of all. She rode well for someone who rarely had a horse available, her posture straight, her hold on the reins steady, and Santiago noticed but did not comment. He stored the information in the part of his mind where important things lived. When they arrived at the main square, half the village was already gathered in front of the registry office. Senora Bernarda occupied a strategic spot in the shade of a tree, her fan flapping anxiously as she whispered with 2 neighbors. Don Ramirez sat on the step of the general store with his arms crossed, watching everything with the expression of someone who had seen this movie before and knew it ended badly. Chuy Morales ran back and forth carrying information like hot merchandise, and when he saw Santiago and Karina dismounting, he sprinted toward them. "Patron, girl!" Victor arrived. "An hour ago. He's inside with Secretary Valdez, Commander Herrera, and 6 more men. They locked the door. No one gets in." "We are getting in," Santiago said, tying his horse to the post. He climbed the 4 stone steps leading to the entrance of the registry office, a square adobe building with a red tile roof and narrow windows barred with iron. The solid wooden door was indeed locked. Santiago knocked 3 times, hard, with the knuckles of his fist. "It's closed," a voice shouted. From inside, "Alejandro, open. It is Santiago Sanchez." There was muffled whispering, dragging footsteps, and the door opened slowly. Alejandro appeared in the gap, his face sweaty, his eyes shifting nervously. "Boss doesn't want visitors." "This is not a visit. It is family business." Santiago pushed the door with the palm of his hand, using just enough force to make Alejandro stumble back 3 steps. He walked in, and Karina followed close behind, lifting her chin in a defiant gesture that made 2 village women outside sigh with envy. The interior of the registry office smelled of old paper, inkwell stains, and mold from a ceiling leak repaired badly. The walls were lined with dark wooden shelves crammed with bound books, whose numbered spines had faded, yellowed documents stacked in crooked towers, and dust that glittered in the sunbeams slipping through the grimy windows. In the center of the room stood a wide table cluttered with more papers, a green glass inkwell, quill pens, and a bronze seal with the official crest of the municipality. Behind the table stood Secretary Valdez, a thin man in his mid-50s with round wire-frame glasses, a mustache trimmed with a ruler, and a bald spot he tried to disguise by combing the side hair over the shining center. He wore a gray vest over a white shirt yellowed beneath the arms, and his ink-stained fingers betrayed decades of bureaucratic work. Beside him, Victor leaned on the table, with the stance of someone who believed he owned the place, and behind him, leaning against the wall, 6 armed men observed with predatory eyes. Commander Herrera occupied a chair in the corner, his large belly stretching the ill-fitted uniform, his thick hands resting on the belt where a revolver hung, likely untouched by cleaning in months. When Santiago stepped inside, the commander did not even stand. He merely lifted his chin in lazy acknowledgement. "Santiago," Victor said, spitting out the name as though it tasted foul. "What a surprise. Thought you'd send a lawyer." I do not need a lawyer to tell you that you are a liar. Santiago stopped 2 meters from the table, Karina standing beside him, and crossed his arms. I received a letter saying Leon has pending debts of 940 pesos. I want to see the documents. Valdez adjusted his glasses with his index finger, selected 3 promissory notes from the pile on the table, and aligned them. With obsessive precision, here they are, all signed by Mr. Leon Martinez, registered and stamped. Santiago took the first, studied it carefully, then moved on to the second and the third. His eyes narrowed. These signatures are forged. Do you have a forensic expert to prove that? Valdez asked in a thin, irritating voice. Not yet, but I will. Until then, they are valid. The secretary tapped the bronze seal on the table, making it ring. And a valid debt not paid becomes a new arrest warrant. Karina stepped forward, took the 3 promissory notes from Santiago's hands, and laid them side by side on the table, ignoring Victor's furious stare. She leaned over them, studying each with the focus of someone examining fabric for flaws. And when she found what she sought, the corner of her mouth lifted into a half-smile devoid of humor. My father writes the letter M in a very particular way, she said, her voice calm but cutting. He makes the middle stroke, higher than the sides. He learned it that way because his grandmother, who was a teacher, taught it like that. It is unique. She pointed to the 3 promissory notes. On all 3 of these, the M is straight. All 3. That is not his handwriting. Valdez blinked behind his glasses. Victor went still, though something tightened along his jaw. Herrera shifted in his chair, making the wood creak. He might have changed the way he writes. The secretary attempted, though his voice held no conviction. My father is 52, Karina countered. He has written the same way since boyhood. He is not changing now. She picked up the first promissory note and held it up toward Valdez. And there is more. The date says April 1910. My father was working on Don Rodrigo's ranch at that time, earning good pay. He had no reason to borrow money, and he has pay stubs at home proving he was receiving regular wages. Pay stubs can be forged too, Victor said, his voice low. And dangerous. They can, Karina agreed, which is why we will bring forensic experts and witnesses, and everyone who worked with my father that year. She set the promissory note back on the table, slapping the paper down with force. And when we prove this is fraud, Secretary Valdez will lose his position, and you, Victor, will go to jail. The room grew so silent one could hear a fly buzzing near the window. Valdez removed his glasses, wiped the lenses with a cloth he took from his pocket, and when he put them back on, his face was pale. Herrera cleared his throat, the gurgling sound of a man who wants to speak but does not know how. Victor, however, did not back down. He took 2 steps toward Karina, stopping far too close, invading her space on purpose. Smart girl, but girls who are too smart end up hurt. Santiago placed a hand on Karina's shoulder and pulled her behind him with firm certainty, positioning himself between her and Victor. Step back. Or, what? Victor smiled, and the smile showed too many teeth. You going to hit me here in the registry office in front of the commander? I do not need to hit you. Santiago did not break eye contact. I only need to speak the truth until everyone hears it. And the truth is that you are a thief, a liar and a coward, and everyone here knows it. The sound of running footsteps outside broke the tension. The door burst open and Chuy stumbled in, tripping over his own legs, his hat, falling to the floor. Santiago, Karina, her father is coming, and half the village is coming with him. Indeed, seconds later, Leon appeared, breathless, and behind him came Celeste, Father Esteban, Señora Lupita, Don Isandro, and about a dozen residents who had decided the matter was now public and required witnesses. The registry office, far too small for so many people, filled quickly with sweating bodies, overlapping voices, and the scent of hard-working folk who were not afraid of corrupt authority. My daughter is right, Leon said, stepping inside and planting himself beside Santiago. I never signed those promissory notes, and anyone who knows me knows how I write. I do, confirmed Don Ramirez, appearing in the doorway. Leon has been buying at my store for 20 years. He signs the credit ledger every week. I have every signature saved. I can bring them. I know as well, said Father Esteban. opening the worn Bible he always carried. Leon signed his son's baptism record. It is right here, with date, witnesses, and all. He turned the yellowed pages, found the entry, and laid it open on the table beside the promissory notes. Compare them. The M is different. Valdez looked at the book, then at the promissory notes, and swallowed hard. Herrera rose from his chair with effort, his belly hindering the movement, and approached the table. He glanced at the papers without touching them, scratched his thick mustache, and then turned toward Victor. "I think we have a problem," the commander murmured. "We have no problem at all," Victor retorted, but his voice had lost some of its force. "There is a signature, a stamp, a record. It is valid until proven otherwise." "And we will prove it," said Santiago. "Today, we will take these notes to the capital, have a handwriting expert examine them, and return with an official report. That will take weeks," Valdez protested. "No, it will not." Santiago pulled another envelope from the inside pocket of his vest. "I sent a telegram yesterday. The expert arrives Monday, 3 days." Victor went completely still, his eyes fixed on Santiago with hatred so intense it felt solid. "You are challenging me." "I am exposing you," Santiago corrected. "That is different." The moneylender stepped back, his hand brushing the handle of the revolver on his belt, and all the men behind him tensed. The entire room held its breath. Leon pulled Celeste behind him. The priest raised a hand in a gesture of peace. It was Karina who broke the standoff. She stepped forward until she stood face to face with Victor, close enough to see the veins bulging in his neck, and when she spoke, her voice was low but clear as a bell. "You lost. Accept it." Victor stared at her, his gaze drifting over her face, her neck, her shoulders, then returning to her eyes with an intensity that made her skin prickle. It was not desire. It was possession. It was the sick hunger of a man who believes he can have something simply because he wants it. "I have not lost anything," he said, his voice so low only Karina heard. "You will still be mine, one way or another." She did not step back. She held his gaze without blinking, and when she answered, each word came out sharp. "Never." Victor smiled slowly, that coiled snake smile waiting for the moment to strike. He turned to Valdez. "Keep those promissory notes. We will resume this on Monday when the expert arrives." Then he looked at Santiago. "And you, farmer, enjoy these 3 days, because after them, everything will change." He left the registry office, followed by his 6 men, and the sound of their boots striking the wooden floor echoed like a warning shot. Alejandro was the last to leave, casting a look at Santiago that was half apology and half fear, then disappearing behind his employer. When the door closed, the room erupted in conversation. Senora Bernarda was already retelling the story to 3 neighbors with dramatic embellishments. Senora Lupita pulled Karina into a tight embrace with the pride of a mother. The priest closed his Bible, murmured a prayer for protection, and left blessing half the crowd on his way out. Leon approached his daughter, and in his eyes was something beyond gratitude. It was recognition. "You were incredible." "I was what I needed to be," Karina replied, adjusting the shawl that had slipped from her shoulders. Santiago stored the promissory notes in a leather folder that Valdez handed over with trembling hands, and as he turned to leave, the secretary spoke softly. "Señor Sanchez, I had no choice. Victor has influence. He has money. He has nothing." Santiago cut in, his voice cold. "And now everyone knows it." They left the registry office under a sun already beginning to sink, and the square buzzed with people commenting, speculating, crafting different versions of the same story. But one thing everyone agreed on: Karina Martinez had entered the registry office as a village girl and walked out as someone who refused to bend. And Santiago Sanchez, solitary widower of the El Altiplano ranch, had found in 3 days what he had not found in 8 years. Someone unafraid to fight beside him. They mounted their horses and rode back, and along the way, Karina finally allowed the exhaustion to settle. She spoke little, simply watched the road stretch ahead, the dry brush on either side, the orange sky deepening into violet, and wondered how her life had transformed in less than a week. On Monday, the expert would arrive. Tuesday would reveal the forgery, and on Saturday, she would marry. What remained to be seen was whether she would survive until then, because Victor was not a man who accepted defeat, and when men like him lost, they did not retreat. They came with everything. The road back to El Altiplano Ranch was quieter than the ride out, not because there was nothing left to say, but because both Santiago and Karina were far too busy processing what had just happened at the registry office. The sun was dropping fast, as it always did in the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would bleed into violet before plunging into absolute black. The horses moved in an easy trot, their horseshoes striking the packed earth in a hypnotic cadence that almost made one forget that the danger was not over. Almost. Santiago rode with the relaxed posture of someone who had been born in a saddle, but Karina noticed that his eyes swept constantly along both sides of the road, the clusters of dry shrubs, the twisted cacti, the rocky formations where shadows could easily hide riders. His right hand rested far too close to his revolver to be coincidence. "Do you think he will try something?" Karina asked, adjusting the reins between her fingers. "Victor?" Santiago looked at her sideways. "He already tried. At the registry. He only failed because there were too many people watching, and now there are none." "Exactly." Karina looked around, measuring distances. They were halfway between the village and the ranch, in a stretch of road with no houses, no neighboring farms, just sparse brush and dry land extending toward the horizon. If anyone wanted to set up an ambush, this was the perfect place. "We should have taken the long road back," she said. "This is the long road." Santiago urged his horse to move a little faster. "The short one goes through the ravine. Worse." The sound came from behind them, hooves striking fast, far too fast for a casual traveler. 3 horses by the sound. Santiago pulled the reins, turning his mount to face whoever approached, and Karina did the same. His hand went to the revolver, though he did not draw it yet. From the bend in the road appeared Victor, Alejandro, and a third man whom Karina recognized as one of the enforcer's usual henchmen, a short, broad-shouldered brute with a scar on his forehead and eyes too small for his face. They stopped about 20 meters away, blocking the path, and for a moment, no one spoke. Victor broke the stalemate, nudging his horse a few steps forward. "Santiago, Karina, what a coincidence to find you two here." "It is not a coincidence," Santiago replied, voice even. "You were waiting to have a civil conversation." Victor smiled, though nothing about that smile was civil, away from curious ears. "We have nothing to discuss." "I believe we do." The loan shark settled in his saddle, his eyes sliding over Karina in a way that made her skin prickle with anger. "About marriage, for example." Santiago stiffened in the saddle. "My marriage is not your concern." "Oh, but it is." Victor leaned forward, arms folded atop the saddle horn. "Because this young woman should be at my house paying her father's debt. But you interfered. Stole what was mine." "I am not a thing," Karina said, voice sharp. "And I was never yours. Not yet." Victor smiled again, and this time showed teeth. "But the night is young." Santiago drew his revolver so quickly it seemed like sleight of hand. He did not aim it at anyone yet, but held it against his thigh, ready to rise if needed. "Move aside. Last time I asked politely." Alejandro backed his horse 3 steps, hands raised in early surrender. The henchman stayed where he was, but his hand slipped toward the knife on his belt. Victor, however, did not move. He remained exactly where he was, studying Santiago with the calm of someone who believed he still had hidden cards to play. "You are not going to shoot," he said, "because if you shoot, you become a murderer. And a murderer loses everything: the ranch, the respect, the bride." "Self-defense," Santiago countered. "Who will prove it? There are no witnesses." That was when the sound of another horse drifted up the road, coming from the opposite direction. Adrian appeared around the bend, riding the chestnut he used to patrol the property line, and when he saw the scene, he pulled the reins so sharply, the horse neighed in pain. The foreman froze there, face pale, eyes bouncing from Santiago to Victor and back. "Adrian," Santiago said without taking his eyes off the loan shark. "Perfect timing." The foreman swallowed hard. I was coming back from the north pasture. I saw you two were late and decided to check if everything was all right." Santiago finished the sentence for him, but irony sharpened every word. or decided to check if the plan had worked. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it, and sweat began to run down his face despite the cold creeping in with the evening. "Boss, I did not. Do not lie." Santiago's voice hardened. "I know you were the one who told Victor we were returning today. I know you passed along the route. I know you set this up. The sea." Foreman dismounted, legs trembling, and took 2 steps toward Santiago with his hands raised. "I needed money. I have gambling debt. He offered 30 pieces of silver?" Karina spat the words. "Like Judas?" Adrian flinched as if he had been slapped. Victor, however, began to laugh, low, unpleasant, echoing through the empty road. "Look at that. Even betrayal has poetry." Santiago lowered his revolver slowly, slipped it back into the holster, and urged his horse forward. "Move, Victor. It is over." "It is not over." The loan shark did not budge. "It is over when I say it is over." The shot exploded then. It was not aimed at anyone. It was fired into the air, but the blast tore through the silence like a whip and made Santiago's horse rear violently, almost throwing him. Santiago gripped the reins with force, trying to control the animal, but the horse spun on its hind legs, neighing in shrill, panicked terror. Karina acted without thinking. She spurred. Her mare closer, grabbed the reins of Santiago's horse from the side and pulled hard, speaking low but firm. "Easy, easy, settle." The animal snorted, tossed its head but obeyed, its 4 hooves returning to the ground. Alejandro stood pale, the revolver still smoking in his hand, his grip trembling so violently the weapon wavered. I was not going to hit anyone. It was only to scare them." "Idiot," Victor snarled. "I told you to wait for the signal, but I thought, you do not think. That is why you are a hired hand." The loan shark turned toward Santiago, and now the mask of civility had fallen completely. "This is a warning, rancher. Next time it will not be a shot into the air." Santiago drew a deep breath, calmed his horse with a hand on its mane, then looked at Victor with an unsettling calm. "If you try again, there will not be a next time, I guarantee it." "Oh, really?" Victor spurred his horse 2 steps forward. "And who is going to defend you, your brave little bride, your treacherous foreman?" He spit on the ground. "You are alone, Santiago, and a man alone does not last long in the desert." That was when another wave of hoofbeats came, this time from both directions. From the village, Leon appeared riding a horse borrowed from Don Ramirez, followed by Chuy Morales and Don Isandro. From the direction of the ranch, 2 of Santiago's ranch hands arrived at a gallop, drawn by the sound of the shot, and behind them, running on foot, but managing to keep up, came Senora Lupita, Father Esteban, and about 5 more villagers who had decided the situation reeked of trouble, and trouble always needed witnesses. Leon halted beside his daughter, breathless. "I knew it. I knew he would try something." "Father, what are you doing here?" "Protecting my daughter." Leon faced Victor, and for the first time since all of this had begun, the man did not look away. "And reporting attempted murder." "Murder?" Victor laughed, though the sound came out strained. "It was a warning shot." "It was attempted homicide," Father Esteban corrected, arriving out of breath with his cassock streaked with mud from so much running. "Witnessed by all these people. Commander Herrera will have to hear it." As if summoned, Herrera himself appeared around the bend riding a tired horse, accompanied by 2 soldiers in poorly kept uniforms. The commander stopped, looked around with the weary expression of someone tired of being dragged into other people's messes, and dismounted with a groan. "What is going on here?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Attempted murder," Leon said before Victor could speak. "Victor and his men set an ambush, fired to scare, nearly killed Santiago." "It was not to kill," Alejandro muttered, still trembling. "It was just to—" "Shut up," Victor snapped. Herrera looked at the henchman, at the loan shark, at Santiago and Karina, and then at the crowd that continued to grow. Senora Bernarda had appeared from who knows where, and was already retelling the story to 3 neighbors with dramatic embellishments. The commander took a long breath, knowing that whatever he decided there would be repeated and retold until it became legend. "Did someone fire a weapon?" he asked. "I did," Alejandro admitted in a thin voice. "But it was an accident," Victor cut in, glaring daggers at the man. The gun went off by mistake. "That is a lie," Karina said, dismounting her horse in one fluid movement. He aimed upward and fired on purpose. It was a clear threat. Herrera scratched his mustache, thinking. The crowd waited, breathing as one. Santiago stayed mounted, his hand once again near the revolver, waiting. Then the commander made the decision that would change everything. "Santiago Sanchez," he said, "I am placing you under arrest for kidnapping and abuse of authority." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Leon stepped. "Vieward? What kidnapping?" "The girl spent the night at his ranch," Victor said, smiling for the first time since the crowd arrived. "Without a wedding, without family, alone with a man." He looked at Karina. "That is kidnapping and abuse." "I went of my own will," Karina countered, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "No one kidnapped me. No one abused anything." "Her word against the law," Herrera said, and there was something almost gleeful in his expression. "And the law is clear. An unmarried girl does not spend the night at a single man's house without family supervision. That is a moral offense." "A moral offense?" Father Esteban stepped forward, raising his Bible like a shield. "Commander, I spoke with both of them. They are getting married Saturday. Everything arranged, everything legal, everything blessed." "Getting married does not mean already married," Herrera retorted. "Until Saturday, he is in violation." Santiago dismounted slowly, handed the reins to one of his men, and walked until he was face to face with the commander. "You are doing this because Victor paid you. I am doing it because it is my job. Your job is to protect the people, not sell justice to a corrupt loan shark." Herrera flushed red. "Watch your mouth, rancher. Or what? You will arrest me twice?" Santiago crossed his arms. "Go ahead, but do it in front of everyone, and everyone will know justice in this village has a price, and that you were bought." The crowd murmured in agreement. Senora Lupita clapped. Don Ramirez, who had arrived running, shouted, "Shame!" And Herrera, realizing he was losing control of the story, did what weak men always do when cornered. He backed down. "I will not arrest you today," he said, voice losing some of its authority. "But watch yourself, Santiago. Any wrong step, and I will be back, with a warrant, and with chains." He turned and mounted his horse with difficulty, the soldiers following. Victor watched the scene with the expression of someone who had lost the battle, but not the war, spurred his horse, and left without another word. Alejandro and the henchman followed, and Adrian, seeing there was no place left for him, mounted as well, and disappeared in the opposite direction. When only allies remained, the tension finally broke. Leon embraced his daughter tightly. The priest blessed everyone twice. Senora Lupita handed out hugs as if they were prizes, and Santiago stood there staring at the empty road where his enemies had vanished, knowing this was not over. It had only begun. Karina approached him, touched his arm lightly. "We survived. For today." Santiago looked at her, and in his eyes there was something new, something that had not been there before, a deep respect mixed with something far more dangerous. "But Victor will not stop, and Herrera will come back. Then we keep fighting. Until when? Until it is over." Karina held his gaze without flinching. "Or have you already given up?" Santiago smiled for the first time since the gunshot had shattered the air. It was not a wide smile, only the corner of his mouth lifting, but it was real. "I do not give up on anything." "Good." She released his arm. "Because I do not either." They mounted again, and the crowd escorted them back to the village like an improvised guard. By the time they arrived, night had completely fallen, and the stars shone across the sky like flowers scattered over a black cloth. And as Santiago took Karina back to the ranch, now escorted by 4 armed ranch hands, one thing became clear to everyone who had witnessed that night. War had been declared, and no one knew who would survive it. Dawn on Saturday arrived with a cutting cold that turned every breath into a white cloud in the dry air. Santiago had not slept. He had spent the last hours sitting on the porch, watching the road with the revolver resting on his thigh. When the sun began to tear across the horizon, painting everything in orange and gold, Karina appeared in the doorway with her hair down, still damp from her bath. "You kept watch the entire night." "Someone had to. Today is the wedding." "I know." Santiago stood, cracking the joints in his back. "And it will be done the right way." The sound of horses and wagons arriving cut the conversation short. Leon came in front, and behind him half the population of San Miguel del Valle. They brought food, flowers tied with twine, clean cloths, and even an accordion. Mrs. Bernarda commanded a group of women with pots. Mrs. Lupita carried a three-tiered cake that swayed dangerously, and Father Esteban walked with the Bible under his arm. "I brought everyone," Leon said as he reached his daughter. "Figured you would need witnesses. Against lies," added Father Esteban. "Victor is spreading that you kidnapped the girl. We came to speak the truth." The El Altiplano ranch burst into life. Women stormed the kitchen. Men set up structures for the ceremony. Children ran among the chickens. Celeste embraced her daughter tightly, and Santiago watched everything with the astonished expression of someone who had forgotten what a full house felt like. It was nearly midday when Chuy Morales arrived running. "Victor is coming. He's bringing Commander Herrera, Secretary Valdez, and about 10 men. They say they're coming to arrest." Santiago walked to the gate with Karina beside him. Leon followed, and the priest abandoned the Bible to join the group. "Anyone who wants to leave should go now," Santiago told the crowd. "Whoever stays, stays knowing there might be trouble." No one moved. Horses appeared, lifting a cloud of dust. Victor at the front, Herrera beside him, Alejandro and the henchman behind, and at the end of the line, Adrian, head bowed. They stopped 10 meters from the gate. "Santiago Sanchez," Herrera began with forced pomp. "I am here to execute an arrest warrant for kidnapping and abuse of a minor." "Minor?" Father Esteban stepped forward. "Karina is 21 years old. She is an adult before God and before the law." Herrera checked a crumpled paper. "It says here she is 17. "Then it's written wrong." Karina planted herself at Santiago's side. "I was born in March of 1891. Do the math." "I have her birth certificate," Leon said, "and the priest has the baptism record, with date, witnesses and everything," confirmed Esteban, showing the Bible. "Written in my own hand." Valdez made one last attempt. "Even if she is an adult, she spent the night in the house of an unmarried man without supervision." "I was there," Elena said, appearing on the porch. "I slept in front of her door the entire night, and I have worked in this house for more than 30 years. I've never lied for anyone." "I testify as well," said Don Rodrigo. "I've known Santiago since he was a boy. This man does not kidnap anyone." One by one, villagers and ranchers positioned themselves behind Santiago and Karina, forming a human barrier. Herrera looked around and reached the obvious conclusion. "Without proof of a crime, there is no arrest." "There is proof!" Victor pounded his fist on the fence. "A warrant based on false information," Valdez said, now uncomfortable. "If the young woman is of age and had supervision, there is no crime." Then Adrian dismounted and walked to the gate with dragging steps. He stopped in front of Santiago. "Boss, I need to speak." He swallowed hard. "I told him about the girl, about the timing, about the wedding. He paid me 100 pesos. I accepted because I have gambling debt. It made a difference," Santiago said, each word heavy. "You almost got us killed yesterday. You almost put Karina in danger. I know. I have no excuse. Only shame." Santiago stared at him for a long moment. "You worked here 7 years. Trusted you. And you sold that trust for 100 pesos. He drew a long breath. "You're fired. Gather your things and leave before sunset. And do not come back." Adrian nodded, mounted his horse and left without looking back. Victor watched everything with transformed rage. "You think you won? I didn't win anything." Santiago opened the gate, standing face to face with the moneylender. "I only proved that lies have short legs." That was when another horse arrived at a gallop. An officer from the capital dismounted with a sealed envelope. "Commander Herrera, I have an arrest warrant for Victor Morales. Handwriting forensics confirmed the forgery of 3 promissory notes, and for you as well, for corruption and abuse of authority." The world seemed to stop. Victor went pale. Herrera tried to retreat, but the officer already had 2 soldiers at his sides. "Both of you are under arrest." Victor spat on the ground. "This isn't over. It's over." Santiago cut in. "Today you lose for real." The soldiers handcuffed Victor and Herrera, placed them on horses, and left under the community's satisfied stares. Valdez, trembling, dismounted, and approached Santiago. I will resign. I don't want to be part of this." "Good decision." When the dust settled, the crowd burst into quiet celebration. No exaggerated cheers or whistles, just relieved smiles and sincere hugs. Santiago turned to Karina. "Now we marry, if you still want to." She placed her hand in his. "I still want to." The wedding happened right there in the yard, beneath the structure covered with white cloths. The priest conducted the ceremony with solemnity and warmth. Santiago repeated the vows, looking directly at Karina, and she held his gaze without wavering. They exchanged simple silver rings. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Santiago hesitated, waiting for permission. She nodded almost imperceptibly, and he kissed her. Quick, respectful, but enough to seal the promise. The celebration was simple and joyful. Leon and Celeste embraced in relief. Mrs. Lupita blessed Karina with the rosary, and when the last visitor left at dusk, Santiago and Karina remained alone on the porch, watching the sky darken. "You don't need to be afraid of me," he said, breaking the weight of what had gone unsaid. "Who said I'm afraid? I know this happened too fast, that you don't know me." He ran a hand through his hair. "I will not demand anything from you. I will not impose. We signed papers, but that does not give me rights over you, over your body, over your choices." Karina held his gaze. "And how do you see it?" "I see you as a person, with the right to say yes or no without consequence." Santiago drew a deep breath. "And I see that if one day you want to leave, I will not hold you. Even after 6 months, even after 6 years." The first raindrop fell, heavy and cold. More drops followed, turning into a fine curtain. Santiago extended his hand. "Come, let's go inside." But Karina did not move. She stood there, face tilted to the sky, letting the rain fall and soak everything. Santiago stayed beside her, also getting drenched, also feeling the same rain that washed away months of drought. When she finally looked at him, there was something different. Not love yet, but possibility. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not being what I expected." She touched his chest lightly, feeling his heart beating far too fast. "You're afraid too." "I am, of failing again. I failed Mariana, and I swore I would never again let someone I promised to protect suffer. I am not her, and I do not need to be saved. I need a partner." Santiago intertwined his fingers with hers. "Can I be that?" "You can try." The rain grew heavier, turning into a storm. They ran to the porch, drenched, breathing hard. Karina let out a quiet laugh, surprising them both. "It has been a long time since I did something simply because I wanted to. But now, I stayed in the rain just because I chose to." Santiago understood. It was a small freedom, but it was freedom. They went inside, and he led her to the main bedroom. "This is your room. You stay here. I will sleep in the room at the end of the hall." Karina turned, surprised. "I thought, share the bed?" "Not until you want to. You decide the time." "And if I want to?" Santiago gripped the doorknob tightly. "Then you call me and I come. And if I never want to, then I sleep alone for the rest of my life." Karina took 2 steps, stopped near him, and touched his face gently. Santiago closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and when he opened them again, there was hunger there. Not the hunger to possess, but to be accepted. She rested her forehead against his, breathing in the scent that was horse, leather, rain, and something that was only him. They stayed like that for long. Seconds, breathing together. "Thank you for waiting. I will wait as long as needed." Karina stepped back slowly and Santiago left, closing the door without locking it. He stood outside for a moment, listening to the sounds she made inside before going to his own room. 2 people who had married out of necessity were beginning to discover that necessity sometimes becomes something else. Not love yet, but something that could grow. Karina lay on the bed, turned the ring on her finger, feeling its weight. She was now the wife of a man who had promised to wait, a man who respected choice. But there was time. She closed her eyes, and lulled by the sound of the rain, finally slept. And in the room at the end of the hall, Santiago lay down thinking about the woman who now shared his roof, about how she was nothing like he expected, and how that was better. The rain fell all night, and when dawn came, the world was washed clean, ready to begin again. The Sunday sun slipped through the bedroom window and found Karina already awake, sitting in the rocking chair as she looked out over the courtyard, where the rain from the previous night had left puddles that shone like shattered glass. She had slept better than she expected, her body sinking into the soft mattress, and when she awoke, the first thing she did was listen for Santiago's footsteps in the hallway. But the house was quiet. She went downstairs, her bare feet making the wood creak, and found Elena in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The cook smiled and pointed to a chair. "Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." "Where is Santiago?" "He left before sunrise. Went to check the pastures after the rain." Elena set a steaming mug in front of her. "He always does that. He worries too much about the work." Karina took a sip, feeling the warm liquid wake the rest of her body. She ate the bread with butter that Elena served, and when she finished, she grabbed her shawl and went out to explore the property that now, technically, was also hers. She walked across the courtyard, past the stables where the horses neighed in greeting, the chicken coop where the birds pecked peacefully, and climbed the small hill behind the house where a solitary tree stood. That was where Santiago found her an hour later, sitting on the dry grass watching the horizon. He stopped a few meters away, as though asking for permission to approach. She patted the grass beside her, and he sat, keeping a respectful distance between them. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I imagined." "And the room? Anything that needs changing?" Karina looked at him, surprised. "Why would it need changing?" "Because it's yours now. You can make it however you want." Santiago pulled a dry twig from the ground, rolling it between his fingers. "Mariana never changed anything. She left everything the way I liked it. But you don't have to do that. The room is fine. The way it is." She hesitated. "But there is one thing. Tell me. I want to work. I don't want to just stay here taking care of the house. I want to help with the accounting, with the administration. I know how to do that." Santiago turned fully to her, and in his eyes there was something that looked like admiration mixed with relief. "I was going to ask you exactly that. The paperwork has been a mess since Adrian left. I have no patience to organize it." "Then leave it to me." "There's something else." He tossed the twig aside. "I want you to learn how to read contracts, understand labor laws, know how to defend the workers' rights. There are classes in town every Tuesday and Thursday night. I'll take you and bring you back." Karina felt something warm bloom in her chest. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. It was recognition. He didn't see her as decoration or possession. He saw her as a true partner. "I accept." They stayed there for a while longer, talking about plans for the ranch, about how to improve pasture rotation, about the idea of creating a community storehouse to support the village. And when they went down for lunch, something had shifted. The tension of the previous day had given way to a timid calm, still fragile, but real. The days that followed found their own rhythm. Karina woke early, helped Elena in the kitchen, and then locked herself in the small room Santiago had set aside for her to use as an office. She spent hours organizing papers, sorting them by category, writing notes in new notebooks he had bought in town. Santiago appeared mid-afternoon, covered in dirt and sweat, and sat across the table to discuss numbers and decisions. "There are 3 workers earning less than they should," she said, pointing at the records. "And you paid twice for the same fence last month." Santiago ran a hand over his face, tired. "How did I let that happen?" "Because you were too busy taking care of everything alone." Karina lifted her eyes to him. "But now you have me." He held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, and something passed between them, small but meaningful. "I have you," he repeated quietly. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Santiago took her to town. He waited outside the classroom, sometimes talking with other ranchers, sometimes simply sitting on a wooden bench reading the newspaper by lamplight. When she came out, he always asked how it had gone, what she had learned, and listened with genuine attention as she spoke. One night on the way back, Karina's horse spooked and she almost fell. Santiago dismounted in a heartbeat, grabbed her arm to steady her, and stood there, his hand still on her arm, their faces closer than they had been since the wedding kiss. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough. "I am." But neither of them moved for long seconds. The full moon illuminated his face, highlighting the line of his jaw, the intensity of furor, the green eyes studying her as though memorizing every detail. Karina felt her heart race, not from fear, but from something entirely different. Santiago released her arms slowly, as if reluctantly, and returned to his horse without another word. But the air between them had changed. The following Friday, Karina was in the kitchen helping Elena prepare dinner when she cut her finger on the knife. It wasn't deep, but it bled enough to stain the cloth she pressed against the wound. Santiago walked in at that moment, saw the blood, and reached her in 3 long strides. "Let me see. It's just a small cut. Let me see," he repeated, firmer this time, and she held out her hand. He took it gently, examined the cut, and then pulled a chair closer. "Sit." He fetched clean water and a fresh cloth, cleaning the wound with a tenderness that contrasted completely with his calloused, work-worn hands. Karina watched his face focused on the task, the slight furrow in his brow, the way his lips pressed into a thin line of concern. "You didn't need to do this," she said quietly. "Elena could have. I wanted to." Santiago lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time Karina saw clearly everything he had been hiding. It wasn't just respect. It wasn't just partnership. It was desire. It was need. It was something much larger that he had been holding back with all his strength because he had promised to wait. "Santiago," she began, but she did not know how to finish the sentence. He finished tying the clean cloth around her finger, tightened it gently to make sure it was secure, and then held her hand between his for a moment before letting go. "All set, but you need to change it tomorrow morning." "I will change it." "No, I will change it." He stood up. "Tomorrow morning." And he left the kitchen before she could respond, leaving Karina sitting there with her heart beating unevenly and Elena smiling faintly, as someone who saw what the young woman was only just beginning to understand. That night, Karina lay in the large bed and could not sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about the way he had held her hand, the genuine concern in his eyes, the way his voice had grown rougher when he said he would change the bandage in the morning. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the moonlit courtyard. On the other side of the house, the light was still on in Santiago's room. He hadn't slept either. Karina stood there for long minutes, her hand on the doorknob, debating with herself. She could go to him. She could knock on his door. He had said he would come if she called, but it was not time yet. Almost, but not yet. She returned to bed and finally fell asleep, dreaming of calloused hands holding hers with tenderness. The next morning, Santiago appeared at her bedroom door with a plate of breakfast in one hand and bandage materials in the other. He knocked softly, waited for her to say, "You may come in," and only then opened the door. "I brought breakfast and I came to change the bandage." Karina was sitting on the bed, hair loose, still in her nightgown. She should have felt exposed, but she did not. She felt safe. "Thank you." He set the plate on the small table beside her, pulled the chair close, and sat in front of her. "Give me your hand." She offered it, and he untied the cloth carefully, examined the cut, already better, cleaned it again with water, and applied a new bandage. But this time, when he finished, he didn't let go immediately. He stayed there holding her hand, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles in a gesture so small it almost didn't exist, yet enough to make her skin tingle. "Karina," he said, and her name in his voice sounded different. It sounded important. "Yes, He drew a deep breath. "I am trying to do the right thing. I am trying to give you time, but it is getting difficult." "Difficult how?" "Difficult not to think about you all the time. Difficult not wanting to be near you every hour. Difficult to sleep at the end of the hallway knowing you are here." Santiago lifted his eyes to her, and there was hunger there, tightly restrained desire, a need he had been holding back for weeks. "I am out of my mind for you, Karina, and I do not know how much longer I can pretend I am not." The world seemed to stop. Karina looked at the man sitting in front of her, at the raw honesty on his face, at the way he held her hand as if it were the most precious thing he had ever touched. "Who asked you to pretend?" she whispered. "You are not ready. And what if I am ready?" Santiago went completely still, as though afraid to move and break the moment. "Are you?" Karina did not answer with words. Instead, she gently lifted his hand, placed it against her face, and closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his palm against her skin. "I am still learning how to trust. Still learning how to want." She opened her eyes, meeting his directly. "But I have learned enough to know that I want you." Santiago released a breath he had been holding, stood slowly, and leaned in until he was at her height. "Are you sure?" "I am. Because if we begin this, there is no turning back for me. I will love you in a way that cannot be undone." "Then love me," she whispered, and he kissed her. It was not the quick, respectful kiss from the wedding. It was the kiss of a man who had waited too long, held back too much, wanted too deeply. It was a deep kiss, desperate, filled with months of restraint breaking all at once. His hands went to her hair, her face, her waist, as if he wanted to touch everything at once and did not know where to begin. Karina answered with the same intensity, her fingers gripping his shoulders, pulling him closer, wanting to erase any space left between them. And when they finally parted for breath, both were breathless, their hearts pounding in uneven rhythm. "Stay with me," she said. "Here, not at the end of the hall. Here." Santiago closed his eyes, breathed deeply as if asking for strength, and then nodded. "Here." The rest of the morning vanished in rumpled sheets, mingled breaths, and discoveries that needed no words. He touched her as though he were seeing a woman for the first time, with reverence, with care, but also with a hunger he could no longer hide. And she received him without fear, without hesitation, because she finally knew with certainty that this was no longer an arrangement. It was choice, it was desire, it was love being born slowly between two people who had begun as strangers and were becoming something far more intense. When the sun was already high and Elena knocked on the door, asking if anyone was coming to lunch, they both laughed softly, still tangled together, still discovering that what had seemed impossible 3 months earlier now felt like the most natural thing in the world. "We should go downstairs," Santiago said, kissing her forehead. "In a minute. Elena will suspect." "Let them," Karina murmured, nestling closer against his chest. "Everyone already knows we are married. But now we are truly married. Now we are truly married," she agreed, smiling. And there, in the golden midday light streaming through the window of the room that finally belonged to both of them, Santiago Sanchez and Karina Martinez stopped, being a desperate arrangement, and became true love. A love that had not been planned, a love that had not been expected, but a love that was real, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. 2 years later, on a Tuesday morning in May, Karina sat on the veranda of the big house with her hand resting over her rounded 7-month belly, watching Santiago work with the ranch hands in the corral. He was shirtless under the strong sun, his bronzed skin gleaming with sweat as he helped brand the new calves, and she could not look away. Even after 2 years sharing the same bed, the same roof, the same life, there were still moments when she looked at him and was startled by the intensity of what she felt. Love had grown slowly between them, like a stubborn plant in dry soil, but once it took root, it had blossomed in ways neither of them expected. It was not fairy tale love, filled with dramatic declarations and grand gestures. It was a love built of small things. Coffee prepared exactly the way she liked without her needing to ask. Hands finding each other under the dinner table. Glances that said, "I choose you," every day, even when the day was hard. Santiago lifted his eyes at that moment, as he did every half hour, just to make sure she was still there. When he saw her watching, he smiled that half smile she had learned to love, left his work, and walked toward the veranda in long strides. "You should be resting," he said, climbing the steps, and crouching in front of her so he could be level with her belly. He placed his hand where the baby usually kicked, and as if waiting for the father's touch, Diego kicked hard against his palm. "This boy is going to be a cowboy," Karina said, laughing, "or he's going to be as stubborn as his mother." Santiago kissed her belly through the fabric of her dress, then rose to press a soft kiss to her mouth. "How are you feeling?" "Good. Tired, but good. Do you want me to ask Elena to bring lunch out here?" "No, I'll walk to the kitchen." Karina cupped his face gently, making him look directly at her. "Stop treating me like I'm going to break. I'm pregnant, not sick." "I know, but no buts." She kissed the tip of his nose, a tender gesture that had become a habit between them. "Go finish your work. I'm fine." Santiago hesitated, the way he always did when it came to her, but finally nodded and returned to the corral. Karina watched him go, and her heart tightened, in that good way that reminded her of how generous life can be when one least expects it. El Altiplano Ranch had flourished over the past 2 years. The community warehouse Karina created now fed 23 families, and none of them had needed to turn to loan sharks since the system began. Santiago registered all the ranch hands with proper documents, paid fair wages, and word spread so quickly that workers from other regions came seeking employment because working for Santiago Sanchez meant being treated with dignity. Leon now worked steadily at Don Felipe's sawmill, with honest pay and decent conditions. Celeste sewed for the families in the village, and Javier attended the school they had opened at the community center. The Martinez family was not rich, but they had enough, and enough they discovered was more than they had ever dared dream of during the years of scarcity. Victor was serving an 8-year sentence for document forgery, extortion, and active corruption. Herrera had been removed from his position and faced charges for abuse of authority, and Valdez, the cowardly secretary, resigned and moved to another town where no one knew his past. Justice had been slow, but it had come. Elena appeared on the veranda with a tray, her eyes shining with the pride of a grandmother who was not a grandmother, but considered herself one. "I brought chicken broth. It's good for you and for the baby. Thank you, Elena. And there's a letter." She pulled an envelope from the pocket of her apron. "Arrived this morning." Karina recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Señora Lupita. She opened it and read, a smile spreading across her face with each line written in excessively careful script. "What is it?" Elena asked, curious. "The village wants to throw a celebration when Diego is born. They say he's the first child of a marriage that began with so much struggle and ended with so much love, and that this deserves to be celebrated." Karina folded the letter again, feeling her eyes grow damp. "They say we're an example. They truly are." Elena sat beside her, took the young woman's hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "When you arrived here, I saw a frightened girl trying to look strong. Now I see a woman who is strong. And I see my boss becoming whole again, not the half-man he'd been since Mariana died. Did he tell you about her?" "He did. He said he loved Mariana the way youth loves, innocently without complication, but that he loves you the way maturity loves, with awareness and with choice, and that this is better." Karina couldn't hold back the emotion this time. It wasn't pregnancy hormones. It was simply the weight of everything they had built together. How something that began as a desperate salvation had become the best thing that ever happened to them. "He tells you that?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "He does, when you're not around, and he thinks I'm not paying attention." Elena smiled. "But I'm always paying attention, and what I see is a man completely in love with his wife, the kind of love that has no middle ground. It's all or nothing." That night after dinner, Santiago led her to the top of a hill. He spread a blanket over the dry grass and helped her sit, settling beside her with his hand automatically going to the belly where Diego slept. "I've been thinking about something," he said, looking at the sky where the first stars were appearing. "What?" "About how none of this was planned. How I wrote that letter to your father without really expecting anything to change. How you agreed to marry me without knowing whether it would work. How we began in fear and ended up with this." He gestured around them, encompassing not only the ranch but everything else, and how it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Karina turned to look at him, her chest full of words she needed to release. "Do you know what my grandmother used to say?" "What?" "That a promise that becomes a chain leaves marks. It binds people until they bleed, but love worth having does not cage anyone." She intertwined her fingers with his. "It invites. It sustains. It sets free. Your grandmother was very wise. She was, and she was right. You invited me instead of trapping me. You sustained me instead of breaking me, and you gave me freedom instead of a cage." Karina touched his face, her thumb brushing along his jawline. "And I choose you, every day, not because I need to, because I want to." Santiago closed his eyes, let out a long breath, and when he looked at her again, there was a light she now recognized. Love, desire, gratitude, all mixed together in an intensity that still startled her. "I love you," he said, "in a way that scares me, in a way I didn't know it was possible to love. I love you too." Karina leaned in and kissed him, slowly this time, without urgency, savoring the moment. And we're going to raise our son in this love. We're going to teach him that marriage is not possession, it's partnership. It's a choice renewed every day. We will, Santiago agreed, pulling her closer and settling her against his chest. And we'll teach him that even when something starts crooked, it can straighten itself out if honesty and respect guide the way. They stayed there until the night fully settled, and the stars multiplied across the sky like sparks thrown over black cloth. The gentle evening breeze carried the scent of earth and wildflowers that grew along the edges of the property. Down below, the main house glowed with lamplight in the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney where Elena prepared bread for the next day. "Let's go back," Santiago said after a while. "You need to rest." "Not yet." Karina nestled closer. "Just a little longer. Always a little longer," he said, smiling. And there, on the hilltop, overlooking everything they had built together, beneath a sky that witnessed yet another quiet victory over cruel circumstances, Santiago and Karina stayed wrapped in each other's arms. 2 years ago, they had been strangers making a desperate agreement. Today, they were husband and wife in the deepest sense those words could hold. They were partners, they were lovers, they were each other's best friend, and in a few weeks they would become parents. Life had not given them the easy path. It had given them the crooked one, full of stones and thorns, but they had walked it together, and along the way discovered that true love is not the kind that comes ready-made. It is the kind you build brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. In the village of San Miguel del Valle, the lights began turning off one by one. Leon and Celeste slept peacefully, knowing their daughter was happy. Javier dreamed of the books he had studied that day, and Senora Lupita, before, closing her eyes, made the sign of the cross and whispered a prayer of gratitude for having witnessed a story of redemption in life. Because in the end, that's what it was. Redemption, a second chance, a love that blooms where no one expects it and flourishes precisely because no one forced it. At the ranch, Santiago carried Karina back home when she finally admitted she was too tired to walk. She protested through laughter, saying she was too heavy with the baby, but he only held her tighter and said he would carry her and 10 more babies if needed. When he laid her in the bed that now belonged to both of them, he removed her boots gently, covered her with the sheet, and lay beside her, his hand instinctively finding the belly where Diego slept. "I love you," he whispered in the dark. "I love you too," she murmured, half asleep. And while all of Mexico slept under the same starry sky, in that small ranch on the Central Plateau, 2 people whom fate had pushed toward each other discovered the simplest and most beautiful truth of all, that true love does not cage, does not demand, does not possess. True love invites, sustains, and sets free. And when 2 people choose that love every day, not because they must, but because they want to, there is no force in the world capable of destroying what they built. Santiago and Karina had begun with an old promise and an impossible debt, but they ended with a love that was free, conscious, and eternal. And that in the end was everything. It was more than everything, it was perfect. Did you feel the intensity between Karina and Santiago? Then support the channel. Leave your like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which moment made you hold your breath. Your hype pushes this story to the top and helps new listeners discover romances like this one.